The ocean holds secrets that would make even the bravest souls question what lurks beneath the waves. Tonight, we're diving into the most terrifying mythical sea creatures ever conceived by human imagination, beings so fearsome that ancient civilizations built entire belief systems around avoiding their wrath, and modern sailors still whisper their names in hushed, reverent tones. From the primordial chaos of Mesopotamian waters to the storm-tossed seas of Norse legend, these dangerous ocean dwellers represent humanity's deepest fears about the vast, unknowable depths that cover our planet. These aren't just stories told around campfires, they're cultural memories of encounters with forces so powerful and alien that they shaped the way entire civilizations understood the sea itself. The ocean covers over 70% of our planet, yet we've explored less than 5% of its mysterious depths. That means there's an entire underwater world waiting in perpetual darkness, where reality and mythology blur together in ways that challenge our understanding of what's possible beneath the waves. These are the ocean secrets that have terrified humanity for millennia, the mythical sea creatures that embody our primal fear of the unknown depths. So before we descend into these legendary waters together, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy diving into the unknown with me. And let me know in the comments, where are you listening from and what time is it for you? I'm always fascinated to see who's brave enough to join us on these midnight journeys into mythological terror. Have you ever felt something watching you from the water? Do any of these ancient legends resonate with your own cultural background? Share your stories. Sometimes the most chilling tales come from our own experiences with the unexplained. Now dim the lights, maybe grab a warm blanket, and let's ease into tonight's exploration of the ocean's most dangerous mythological inhabitants. These creatures weren't born from idle imagination. They emerged from humanity's earliest encounters with the sea's terrifying power, transformed through generations of storytelling into beings that represent the ocean's capacity for both wonder and absolute destruction. Story 1. Macara, the cosmic guardian of sacred waters. Our journey into the dangerous ocean's most terrifying mythical inhabitants begins in the sacred waters of ancient India, where a creature so powerful and enigmatic emerged from Hindu cosmology that it became both a divine mount and a maritime nightmare. This is the story of the Macara, a being that embodies the ocean's dual nature as both life-giver and destroyer, whose very existence challenges our understanding of where divine protection ends and supernatural terror begins. In the vast pantheon of Hindu mythology, few creatures command the respect and fear inspired by the Macara. This isn't merely a sea monster born from sailors' imagination. It's a cosmic entity that serves as the mount of Varuna, the mighty god of the seas, and Ganga, the divine personification of the sacred river. To encounter a Macara in the dangerous ocean wasn't just to face a predator, it was to confront the very embodiment of water's creative and destructive power. The ancient texts describe the Macara as a creature that defies natural classification, a divine hybrid that combines the most fearsome aspects of three apex predators: the crushing jaws and armored hide of a crocodile, the massive bulk and intelligence of an elephant, and the sinuous striking power of a serpent. This wasn't random monster-making by ancient storytellers. Each element of the Macara's form represents a specific aspect of water's power over human life. The crocodile aspect embodies the sudden, explosive violence that water can unleash. Like the reptilian predators that lurk in river shallows, the Macara could remain motionless for hours, appearing as nothing more than a floating log or piece of debris before erupting into devastating action. Ancient mariners learned to fear calm waters where debris gathered, knowing that what appeared to be harmless flotsam might suddenly reveal itself as a gaping maw capable of swallowing an entire boat. The elephant characteristics of the Macara represent water's unstoppable force and ancient memory. Just as elephants never forget, the Macara was believed to remember every slight against the sacred waters, every ritual neglected, every offering not made. Its trunk-like appendages could reach from beneath the surface to drag entire vessels into the depths, while its massive bulk could create waves powerful enough to swamp fleets. Most terrifying of all was the serpentine nature woven throughout the Macara's being. This aspect gave the creature an almost supernatural flexibility and speed, allowing it to coil around ships like a python around prey, slowly crushing wooden hulls, while its victims remained powerfully aware of their approaching doom. The snake element also connected the Macara to ancient symbols of infinity and cosmic cycles, suggesting that encounters with this creature weren't just physical threats, but spiritual tests. The Mahabharata, one of Hinduism's most sacred epics, contains passages that describe the Macara's role in cosmic order with a mixture of reverence and terror. According to these ancient accounts, the creature doesn't simply inhabit the dangerous ocean, it is the ocean's conscious, will made manifest. When the cosmic balance is disturbed, when mortals show insufficient respect for water's power, the Macara awakens from its meditative state to restore order through methods that often prove fatal to those who triggered its attention. Temple carvings throughout India and Southeast Asia depict the Macara not as a monster to be defeated, but as a guardian to be appeased. These stone representations show the creature emerging from temple walls and doorways, its massive jaws open in what could be either a roar of challenge or an invitation to enter sacred space. The ambiguity is intentional. The Macara represents the thin line between divine protection and divine wrath. Archaeological evidence suggests that ancient Indian naval expeditions carried elaborate rituals specifically designed to honor any Macara they might encounter in the dangerous ocean. These weren't simple good luck charms or protective prayers, but complex ceremonial exchanges where maritime travelers offered tribute in exchange for safe passage through the Macara's domain. The artifacts recovered from these expeditions, intricately carved jade figures, gold offerings shaped like fish and lotus blossoms, and ceremonial weapons that were thrown overboard at specific coordinates, suggest that encounters with Macara were not only expected but carefully planned for. What makes the Macara particularly fascinating from a modern perspective is how its mythology perfectly captures the ocean's most dangerous characteristics. The creature's unpredictable nature mirrors the sea's ability to change from calm to violent without warning. Its immense strength reflects water's capacity to move objects weighing thousands of tons. Its intelligence and memory echo the way ocean currents and tides follow patterns that seem almost conscious in their precision and persistence. The creature's connection to Capricorn in Vedic astrology adds another layer of complexity to its mythology. As the celestial Macara, it governs cosmic cycles of creation and destruction, suggesting that the creature's appearances in the dangerous ocean were tied to larger patterns of universal significance. Ancient astronomers claimed that when certain stellar configurations aligned with the Macara constellation, the sea creatures became more active, more dangerous, and more likely to interact with human vessels. Modern scholars studying maritime archaeology in the Indian Ocean have discovered evidence that lends eerie credibility to ancient Macara legends. Shipwrecks scattered across traditional trade routes show damage patterns that don't match any known natural phenomena, massive crush marks on wooden hulls, as if something with incredible bite force had tested the vessel's structural integrity. Anchor chains have been found twisted into impossible spirals, wrapped around coral formations in ways that suggest immense strength applied with methodical precision. Perhaps most unsettling are the recurring reports from modern fishing vessels and research ships operating in waters traditionally associated with Macara mythology. Sonar equipment frequently detects massive underwater forms that don't match any known marine life, creatures that appear to move with purposeful intelligence through the depths before disappearing from all detection. These contacts are typically accompanied by equipment malfunctions, compass anomalies, and the kind of electromagnetic disturbances that ancient texts attribute to the Macara's presence. The dangerous ocean secrets surrounding the Macara extend beyond physical encounters to psychological and spiritual dimensions that challenge Western understanding of marine phenomena. In Hindu belief, the Macara doesn't just threaten the body, it tests the soul. Those who survive encounters with the creature often report profound spiritual experiences, visions of cosmic significance, and a fundamentally altered relationship with water that stays with them for life. Traditional fishermen in coastal India still perform Macara-specific rituals before venturing into deep waters, ceremonies that haven't changed substantially in over 1,000 years. These aren't quaint superstitions, but sophisticated psychological preparations for encounters with forces that transcend normal maritime dangers. The rituals acknowledge that in the dangerous ocean, the greatest threats often come not from storms or mechanical failure, but from the sea's own conscious guardians. The Macara's legacy in modern times extends far beyond its original Hindu context. As one of the world's most complex and psychologically sophisticated mythical sea creatures, it has influenced maritime mythology across cultures, appearing in modified forms in Southeast Asian legends, influencing dragon mythology in East Asia, and even inspiring elements of modern cryptozoological research. What emerges from studying the Macara is a portrait of the dangerous ocean as a living, conscious entity rather than simply a physical environment. The creature represents humanity's ancient understanding that the sea possesses its own intelligence, its own agenda, and its own standards for how visitors should behave within its domain. In the depths where Macara dwells, the normal rules of predator and prey, natural and supernatural, life and death become beautifully, terrifyingly irrelevant. The next time you find yourself gazing out over calm tropical waters, remember that beneath that peaceful surface might lurk guardians whose power extends far beyond the physical realm, ancient protectors of the dangerous ocean's most sacred secrets, waiting with infinite patience for the moment when the cosmic balance requires their intervention. Story 2. Leviathan, the primordial chaos serpent. From the cosmic guardians of Hindu waters, we now plunge into the depths of Judeo-Christian mythology, where a creature so terrifying and powerful exists that it required divine intervention to contain its apocalyptic potential. This is the Leviathan, a being that represents not just the dangerous ocean's capacity for destruction, but chaos itself made manifest in serpentine form. A creature so fundamental to the cosmic order that its very existence challenges the boundary between mythical sea creature and primordial force of nature. In the ancient texts that form the foundation of Western civilization, few beings command the awe and terror inspired by the Leviathan. This isn't merely another sea monster lurking in maritime folklore. It's a cosmic entity whose presence in the dangerous ocean represents the primordial chaos that existed before divine order imposed structure upon the universe. To encounter the Leviathan isn't just to face a predator. It's to confront the fundamental forces that shaped reality itself. The Book of Job provides one of the most detailed and terrifying descriptions of the Leviathan ever recorded in religious literature. Can you draw out Leviathan with a fishhook, or press down its tongue with a cord? Can you put a rope in its nose, or pierce its jaw with a hook? The passage continues with descriptions that paint a picture of absolute invincibility. A creature whose scales form impenetrable armor, whose breath kindles coals, and whose very movement churns the sea like a boiling pot. But these aren't merely poetic metaphors designed to illustrate divine power. Ancient scholars interpreted these descriptions as literal accounts of a being that existed in the dangerous ocean's deepest places. A creature so perfectly adapted to destruction that only the direct intervention of divine will could prevent it from reducing all of creation to primordial chaos. The Leviathan wasn't just untamable by humans. It was beyond the reach of any earthly force. The creature's fire-breathing capabilities set it apart from virtually every other mythical sea creature in ancient literature. While most marine monsters relied on crushing strength, venomous bites, or supernatural powers, the Leviathan combined aquatic dominance with an ability to project flames that could boil seawater and incinerate ships from a distance. This dual nature, mastery over both water and fire, marked it as a being that transcended normal natural laws. Medieval interpretations of the Leviathan added layers of theological complexity that transformed it from a mere physical threat into a spiritual adversary of cosmic significance. Scholars associated the creature with the sin of envy, suggesting that its attacks on human vessels weren't random predation, but targeted assaults motivated by supernatural malice. The Leviathan didn't just destroy ships. It corrupted souls, turning survivors into carriers of spiritual pollution that could spread through entire communities. The scale attributed to the Leviathan defies comprehension even by mythological standards. Ancient texts describe a creature so massive that its coils could encircle entire kingdoms, whose tail could generate tidal waves capable of flooding continents, and whose awakening would signal the end of the current cosmic age. This wasn't hyperbole, but careful theological positioning. The Leviathan represented chaos held in check, a force so destructive that its full awakening would require the complete restructuring of reality. Archaeological discoveries in the Mediterranean and Red Sea regions have uncovered artifacts that suggest ancient maritime cultures took the Leviathan threat with deadly seriousness. Protective amulets bearing serpentine imagery, ceremonial weapons designed specifically for sea battles, and ship designs incorporating defensive features against massive aquatic predators. indicate that the creature was considered a real and present danger rather than merely a symbolic representation of chaos. What makes the Leviathan particularly terrifying from a maritime perspective is its intelligence and deliberate malice. Unlike natural predators that attack from hunger or territorial instinct, the Leviathan's assaults on human vessels were described as calculated acts of warfare against divine order. The creature didn't simply destroy ships. It methodically hunted down representatives of civilization and order, targeting vessels that carried religious artifacts, diplomatic missions, or trade goods that facilitated human cooperation. Ancient naval records, preserved in monastery libraries across Europe and the Middle East, contain fragmentary accounts of encounters that may represent actual Leviathan sightings. These documents describe massive serpentine forms rising from the depths during storms, creatures whose very presence seemed to intensify the dangerous ocean's fury. Ships that survived these encounters reported that their compasses spun wildly, their chronometers stopped functioning, and their crews experienced visions of cosmic significance that left permanent psychological scars. The Leviathan's association with apocalyptic prophecy adds another dimension to its terror. According to various eschatological traditions, the creature's final awakening will coincide with the end of the current world order, when the dangerous ocean will reclaim the land and chaos will overwhelm divine structure. This prophetic role means that every reported Leviathan sighting carries implications far beyond maritime safety. It suggests that cosmic events are approaching that will fundamentally alter the nature of reality. Modern oceanographic research has discovered phenomena in the deepest parts of the ocean that eerily parallel ancient descriptions of the Leviathan. Hydrothermal vents that spew superheated water and gases, creating underwater fires in the abyss. Massive underwater currents that move with the power and persistence of living creatures. Seismic activities that generate patterns of movement across the ocean floor, as if something enormous was shifting its coils in the depths. Perhaps most unsettling are the recorded instances of what marine biologists call impossible sonar contacts. Massive forms detected moving through deep ocean trenches at speeds and in patterns that don't match any known marine life. These contacts often appeared during periods of increased seismic activity, as if something vast was stirring in response to the Earth's movements. The creatures detected appear to be serpentine in form, of impossible size, and capable of maneuvers that defy current understanding of marine biology. The dangerous ocean secrets surrounding the Leviathan extend into modern theological and philosophical debates about the nature of chaos and order. Some scholars argue that the creature represents humanity's deepest fears about the collapse of civilization, the return to primordial conditions where human achievements become meaningless in the face of natural forces beyond our control or understanding. Naval historians studying unexplained maritime disasters have identified patterns that seem to echo ancient descriptions of Leviathan attacks. Ships that vanish without distress signals in calm weather, vessels found abandoned with no signs of struggle but clear evidence that the crew fled in absolute terror, and rescue operations that discover wreckage-bearing damage patterns, unlike anything produced by known forces. Crushing injuries that suggest immense serpentine coils, burn marks that appear to come from internal heat rather than external fire. The Leviathan's influence on human psychology extends far beyond maritime contexts. The creature has become a symbol for any force so powerful and chaotic that it threatens to overwhelm human attempts at order and control. Thomas Hobbes famously adopted the name for his treatise on political philosophy, recognizing that the creature represented the kind of absolute power necessary to contain human chaos, but also the terror of living under such power. In the context of climate change and rising sea levels, some modern interpreters see the Leviathan as a prophetic warning about the dangerous ocean's capacity to reclaim human civilization. As coastal cities face increasing flood risks and marine ecosystems undergo rapid changes, the ancient image of a massive serpent churning the seas into chaos takes on contemporary relevance that would have been unimaginable to earlier generations. What emerges from studying the Leviathan across millennia of human culture is a portrait of the dangerous ocean as a force that exists beyond human categories of understanding. The creature represents not just physical threat but existential challenge. A reminder that beneath the waves lie powers that dwarf human achievement and that regard our civilizations as temporary intrusions upon their eternal domain. The next time you stand before the ocean during a storm, watching waves crash with seemingly infinite power. Remember that ancient eyes saw in such displays not just natural phenomena, but evidence of the Leviathan's presence. A cosmic serpent whose stirring could transform the peaceful sea into an agent of apocalyptic change, whose very existence reminds us that some mythical sea creatures embody forces too fundamental and terrifying for comfortable human comprehension. Story 3. Cedus, the divine instrument of oceanic wrath. From the primordial chaos of the Leviathan, we now navigate to the sun-drenched waters of the Mediterranean, where Greek mythology birthed one of the most terrifying examples of the dangerous ocean's capacity to serve as an instrument of divine justice. This is the story of Cedus, a creature whose existence proves that some mythical sea creatures aren't born from the depths. They're sent there by gods whose anger transforms the peaceful sea into a hunting ground for monsters that embody the consequences of mortal hubris. The legend of Cedus begins not in the ocean's depths, but in the vain proclamations of Queen Cassiopeia of Ethiopia, whose boastful claim that her daughter Andromeda was more beautiful than the sea nymphs would unleash one of the most devastating examples of divine retribution ever recorded in classical mythology. This wasn't merely a tale of a sea monster terrorizing coastal villages. It was a carefully orchestrated demonstration of how the dangerous ocean could be weaponized by offended deities to deliver lessons in humility that entire civilizations would never forget. Poseidon, the tempestuous god of the seas, didn't simply send Cedus to punish a single family's pride. He crafted the creature specifically to embody the ocean's capacity for targeted destruction, creating a being whose every aspect was designed to generate maximum terror, while delivering a message that would resonate across generations. Cedus wasn't just a predator. It was a living manifestation of the sea's ability to transform from life-giving source to apocalyptic destroyer at the whim of divine will. Ancient descriptions of Cedus paint a picture of a creature that defied natural classification, combining the most fearsome aspects of serpent and whale into a form that seemed designed by nightmare itself. Ovid's Metamorphoses describes a beast whose serpentine body could coil through the water with impossible grace, while its whale-like bulk could generate waves powerful enough to flood coastal settlements. The creature's massive jaws weren't just capable of swallowing ships whole, they could bite islands in half, reshaping coastlines with casual destruction. What made Cedus particularly terrifying was its systematic approach to coastal devastation. Unlike random natural disasters or opportunistic predators, the creature methodically targeted specific locations with an intelligence that suggested divine guidance. It would approach Ethiopian shores with deliberate precision, creating tsunamis that destroyed specific harbors while leaving others untouched, demonstrating that its attacks weren't random but carefully orchestrated punishments for specific transgressions. The monster's relationship with the dangerous ocean around it was unlike anything seen in other maritime mythologies. Where most sea creatures inhabited their aquatic environment, Cedus seemed to command it. The waters would begin to churn and darken miles before the creature's arrival, as if the sea itself was preparing for the monster's presence. Fish would flee in massive schools, birds would abandon their usual flight patterns, and experienced sailors would report an oppressive atmospheric pressure that made breathing difficult, all signs that something fundamental was disturbing the natural order. Artistic representations of Cedus from ancient Greece reveal a creature whose appearance evolved as the legends spread across different regions and time periods. Early depictions show a relatively traditional sea serpent, but later versions incorporate increasingly monstrous features. Multiple heads, eyes that burned with divine fire, scales that could deflect arrows and spears, and a roar that could shatter ships' hulls through sound alone. These evolving descriptions suggest that encounters with the creature, or beings like it, continued throughout the classical period. The most chilling aspect of the Cedus legend was the creature's patience in executing divine will. Rather than simply destroying everything in its path, the monster established a systematic reign of terror designed to force the Ethiopians to sacrifice their princess. It would appear at regular intervals, demonstrating its power through targeted attacks that escalated in destructiveness until the demanded offering was made. This wasn't mindless aggression, but calculated psychological warfare conducted by a being that understood human nature as well as divine justice. Archaeological evidence from Mediterranean coastal sites has uncovered defensive structures that seem specifically designed to combat massive marine threats. These installations, featuring walls extending far into the water, specialized harbors with multiple levels of barriers, and ceremonial platforms clearly intended for sacrificial offerings to sea-based deities, suggest that communities throughout the region took the threat of creatures like Cedus with deadly seriousness. The creature's ultimate defeat by Perseus, who turned it to stone using Medusa's head, represents one of the few instances in mythology where a divine sea monster was permanently neutralized rather than simply appeased or temporarily banished. Yet even this victory carried ominous implications. The stone form of Cedus was said to remain visible beneath the Mediterranean surface, serving as a permanent reminder of the dangerous ocean's capacity to harbor creatures of unimaginable power. Modern marine archaeology has discovered formations on the Mediterranean seafloor that bear unsettling resemblances to ancient descriptions of the petrified Cedus. These massive stone structures, too regular to be natural formations, yet too large to be human constructions, stretch for miles along certain underwater ridges. Sonar imaging reveals shapes that appear serpentine, with sections that could represent a massive creature's coiled body frozen in stone, exactly as the Perseus legend describes. What makes these discoveries particularly unnerving is their location along ancient trade routes, where historical records document unusual numbers of unexplained shipwrecks. Vessels that should have been sailing in safe, well-known waters instead foundered under mysterious circumstances, often during calm weather when no natural explanation for their loss existed. The concentration of these disasters around the stone formations suggests that something about these underwater features continued to pose a threat to maritime traffic long after the original Cedus was supposedly defeated. The dangerous ocean secrets surrounding Cedus extend beyond the creature itself to the broader implications of its existence. If the gods could create such beings and deploy them against human civilizations, what other weapons might be waiting in the depths? The creature's appearance established a precedent that suggested the sea itself was allied with divine forces against human presumption, a concept that fundamentally altered how ancient cultures viewed maritime exploration and coastal development. Religious practices throughout the Mediterranean region incorporated Cedus-specific rituals designed to prevent similar divine punishments. These weren't simple protective ceremonies, but complex theological responses to the realization that the dangerous ocean could become a battleground where human civilizations faced cosmic forces beyond their comprehension. The rituals required participants to formally acknowledge their subordinate position in the cosmic hierarchy and to make specific offerings designed to prevent their communities from inadvertently triggering divine wrath. Modern shipping lanes in the Mediterranean still avoid certain areas where ancient charts marked Cedus waters, regions where unexplained equipment failures, compass anomalies, and unusual wave patterns continue to challenge modern navigation technology. These phenomena might be dismissed as natural oceanic quirks, but their concentration in areas specifically associated with the Cedus legend suggests that some aspects of the ancient terror may persist in forms that modern science doesn't yet understand. The creature's influence on human psychology extends far beyond maritime contexts into contemporary discussions about environmental consequences and divine justice. As climate change and oceanic pollution threaten coastal civilizations worldwide, some interpreters see in the Cedus legend a prophetic warning about the consequences of treating the dangerous ocean as a resource to be exploited rather than a force to be respected. Naval historians studying patterns of unexplained maritime disasters have identified recurring elements that echo the Cedus legend: sudden, catastrophic damage to vessels in calm waters, reports of massive forms moving beneath ships immediately before disasters, and survivor accounts describing roaring sounds that seem to come from the ocean itself rather than any visible source. These patterns appear with statistical regularity that suggests either persistent psychological phenomena affecting maritime witnesses or the presence of forces in the dangerous ocean that operate according to principles we don't yet comprehend. What emerges from studying Cedus across millennia of human culture is an understanding of the dangerous ocean as a realm where divine will and natural force converge in ways that challenge human assumptions about power, justice, and the relationship between civilization and the cosmic order. The creature represents not just physical threat but moral warning, a reminder that some mythical sea creatures embody consequences that extend far beyond individual encounters into the very foundations of how societies relate to the natural world. The next time you gaze across the Mediterranean's deceptively calm waters, remember that beneath that azure surface may still rest the stone form of divine wrath made manifest, a petrified reminder that the dangerous ocean serves powers greater than human understanding, and that some debts to the cosmic order are paid in ways that transform legend into geological fact. Story 4. Sila, the inescapable predator of narrow waters. From the divine justice of Cedus, we now navigate into the treacherous strait, where Greek mythology placed one of the most psychologically terrifying examples of the dangerous ocean's capacity to create perfect killing machines. This is the story of Sila, a creature whose transformation from beautiful nymph to multi-headed maritime nightmare represents not just personal tragedy, but the ocean's ability to corrupt innocence into something so fundamentally predatory that escape becomes not just unlikely, but geometrically impossible. The legend of Sila begins with a tale of jealousy and magical transformation that would have profound implications for every sailor who dared navigate the narrow waters between Sicily and the Italian mainland. Once a lovely sea nymph, beloved by fishermen and admired by gods, Sila's metamorphosis into a six-headed monster represents one of mythology's most chilling examples of how the dangerous ocean can transform beauty into horror, creating predators perfectly adapted to exploit the maritime environment's most vulnerable points. Circe, the powerful sorceress whose jealousy triggered Sila's transformation, didn't simply create a monster. She engineered a perfect killing machine specifically designed to make certain waters impassable. The curse that changed Sila wasn't random magical violence, but precisely calibrated biological warfare, transforming a single being into a creature whose very anatomy made it ideally suited to hunt in the confined spaces where ships had no room to maneuver and nowhere to flee. The physical description of the transformed Sila reads like a nightmare designed by someone who understood maritime vulnerabilities with terrifying precision. 6 heads, each equipped with triple rows of razor-sharp teeth, positioned at exactly the right height to snatch sailors from ship decks. A serpentine lower body that allowed her to strike from multiple angles simultaneously while remaining anchored to her cliffside lair. Most terrifyingly, an intelligence that retained human cunning while gaining predatory instincts that made her hunting strategies devastatingly effective. What made Sila particularly horrifying wasn't just her physical capabilities, but her tactical positioning in the dangerous ocean's geography. The strait she haunted was narrow enough that ships couldn't avoid coming within striking distance, yet wide enough that crossing seemed deceptively safe until her heads emerged from concealment. This geographical trap meant that Sila's hunting success didn't depend on pursuing prey. The dangerous ocean's currents and wind patterns would deliver victims directly to her waiting jaws. Homer's Odyssey provides the most detailed account of Sila's hunting methods, describing how she would remain perfectly still against her cliff face until ships passed within range, then strike with coordinated precision that made resistance futile. The literary description emphasizes that she didn't attack randomly, but selected specific crew members with deadly efficiency, each head claiming exactly one victim before retreating to digest the meal, while the ship continued its passage, now short-handed and traumatized. This selective predation pattern reveals something deeply unsettling about Sila's intelligence. Unlike natural predators that attack from hunger or territorial instinct, she seemed to understand the psychological impact of her hunting methods. By taking only part of each ship's crew, she ensured that survivors would spread tales of her existence, creating a psychological weapon that was often more effective than her physical attacks in controlling maritime traffic through her territory. Archaeological evidence from ancient Mediterranean sites reveals that coastal communities near Sila's traditional hunting grounds developed unique defensive strategies that suggest they considered her threat very real rather than merely mythological. Fortified harbors with multiple exit routes, ship designs incorporating overhead protection for crew members, and religious sites specifically dedicated to appeasing multi-headed sea monsters all indicate that ancient mariners took systematic precautions against creatures matching Sila's description. The dangerous ocean secrets surrounding Sila extend beyond her individual threat to represent a broader category of maritime predators that exploit environmental choke points. Modern naval strategists studying ancient trade routes have identified numerous locations where geographical constraints created similar tactical vulnerabilities, suggesting that creatures like Sila, whether mythological or based on real encounters, represented a type of threat that ancient mariners faced repeatedly. What makes Sila particularly terrifying from a modern perspective is how her hunting methods parallel contemporary understanding of ambush predation in marine environments. The creature's ability to remain motionless for extended periods, strike with explosive speed, and retreat to safety mirrors the behavior patterns of real marine predators that have evolved to exploit similar environmental advantages. This biological realism embedded within the mythological framework suggests that ancient storytellers were drawing from direct observations of predatory behavior in dangerous ocean environments. The psychological impact of Scylla's legend extended far beyond her immediate geographical territory. The creature became a symbol for inescapable choices in maritime contexts, situations where every available option carried significant risk, and where survival depended more on accepting losses than on finding perfect solutions. This concept of managed catastrophe became fundamental to ancient navigation philosophy and continues to influence maritime decision-making today. Religious practices throughout the Mediterranean incorporated Scylla-specific rituals designed to minimize losses during passage through dangerous waters. These ceremonies weren't attempts to prevent encounters with the creature, but rather negotiations aimed at limiting the damage she would inflict. Sailors would designate specific crew members as potential sacrifices, perform rituals acknowledging the creature's territorial rights, and carry offerings designed to satisfy her hunger without requiring human lives. Modern sonar surveys of the waters traditionally associated with Scylla have detected cave systems and underwater formations that could have provided perfect concealment for large predators. These geological features, combined with current patterns that would funnel ships into predictable paths, create environmental conditions that would make systematic ambush predation not just possible, but highly efficient for creatures adapted to exploit these advantages. Perhaps most unsettling are the recurring reports from modern maritime traffic in the region, describing equipment malfunctions and unusual sonar contacts that seem to echo ancient descriptions of Scylla encounters. Ships passing through narrow Mediterranean straits report detecting multiple large forms, moving in coordinated patterns near underwater cliff faces, creatures that appear on sonar briefly, before vanishing in ways that suggest intelligence, rather than random marine life behavior. The dangerous ocean's capacity to hide creatures like Scylla extends into contemporary discussions about undiscovered marine predators and the limitations of modern detection technology. Deep underwater cave systems, particularly those connected to ancient geological formations, could theoretically harbor large predators that surface only occasionally and in locations where human observation would be minimal. The persistence of unexplained maritime incidents in waters traditionally associated with Scylla suggests that some aspects of the ancient threat may continue in forms that modern science hasn't yet identified. Naval historians studying patterns of ship losses in confined waters have documented phenomena that parallel ancient descriptions of Scylla attacks, vessels that lose specific numbers of crew members without experiencing structural damage, incidents where crew members disappear from deck positions during calm weather passages through narrow straits, and survivor accounts describing coordinated attacks by multiple entities that seem to operate with unified intelligence. The creature's influence on maritime psychology extends beyond direct encounters to shape how sailors approach navigation in confined waters. The concept of the Scylla choice, accepting certain losses to avoid total destruction, became embedded in maritime culture as a fundamental survival strategy. This psychological framework acknowledges that some dangerous ocean environments present scenarios where perfect safety isn't possible and where survival depends on managing rather than eliminating risk. Modern shipping protocols in narrow straits still incorporate elements that echo ancient Scylla avoidance strategies, maintaining specific crew positions during passages, following prescribed routes that minimize exposure time in vulnerable areas, and preparing contingency plans that assume the loss of personnel rather than attempting to guarantee complete safety. These practices suggest that the tactical lessons embedded in the Scylla legend continue to influence maritime behavior thousands of years after the original myth was recorded. What emerges from studying Scylla across millennia of human culture, is a portrait of the dangerous ocean as an environment where traditional concepts of fair play and equal combat become meaningless. The creature represents the sea's capacity to create situations where survival depends not on strength or skill, but on accepting that some battles cannot be won, only endured with minimal losses. The transformation from beautiful nymph to predatory nightmare also speaks to deeper fears about the ocean's capacity to corrupt and transform. Sila's legend suggests that the dangerous ocean doesn't just harbor monsters, it creates them, transforming the innocent and beautiful into creatures perfectly adapted to exploit maritime vulnerabilities. This metamorphosis theme resonates with modern concerns about how oceanic pollution and climate change might be creating new forms of marine threats that human civilization isn't prepared to face. In the narrow waters where Sila once hunted, modern vessels still report unexplained phenomena that echo the ancient terror: sudden equipment failures that affect only specific crew positions, sonar contacts that suggest coordinated movement by multiple large entities, and the persistent sense of being observed from underwater vantage points that would provide perfect ambush positions. Whether these experiences represent psychological echoes of ancient fears or encounters with forces that operate beyond current scientific understanding, they serve as reminders that some mythical sea creatures embody threats that transcend individual legends, to become permanent features of dangerous ocean environments. The next time you navigate narrow waters between towering cliffs, remember that you're traveling through territory where the ocean's capacity for perfect predation was given form and purpose, where ancient fears about inescapable choices continue to influence how humanity approaches the fundamental challenge of crossing waters that serve interests older and more patient than human civilization. Story 5. Kuribdus, the living whirlpool that devours reality. From the precision strikes of Sila, we now spiral into the ultimate expression of the dangerous ocean's power to become a living force of consumption. Kuribdus, a creature whose very existence transforms water from a medium of travel into an active predator that swallows ships, sailors, and reality itself. This is the story of a being so fundamentally alien to human understanding that it challenges our basic concepts of life, death, and the boundary between creature and natural phenomenon. The legend of Kuribdus begins with divine punishment so severe that it transformed a living being into something that exists at the intersection of monster and geological feature. Once a nymph whose greed for the sea's bounty earned Zeus's eternal wrath, Charybdis was cursed to become a mouth that could never be satisfied, a throat that would swallow the ocean itself 3 times each day for eternity. This wasn't merely transformation, it was the creation of a force that would make the dangerous ocean's most treacherous waters impossible to navigate safely. What makes Charybdis uniquely terrifying among mythical sea creatures is that she doesn't hunt in any conventional sense. While other marine monsters pursue prey through the water, Charybdis has become the water, a living vortex that draws victims into herself, not through predatory aggression, but through the simple, unstoppable physics of her existence. Ships don't encounter Charybdis. They discover that the ocean beneath them has become Charybdis, and by then escape is already impossible. Homer's Odyssey describes the creature's feeding cycle with mathematical precision that suggests ancient mariners had observed and documented the phenomenon with scientific rigor. 3 times daily, Charybdis would inhale the entire sea around her position, creating a whirlpool so massive that it could drain entire bays and expose the seafloor for miles in every direction. Then, in a display of power that defied natural law, she would exhale the consumed water in a violent eruption that could launch ships hundreds of feet into the air. This cyclical nature of Charybdis's threat created a form of maritime Russian roulette, where timing became more crucial than navigation skill. Experienced sailors could theoretically predict when the creature would be feeding and when she would be relatively dormant, but the margin for error was so small that even perfect calculations could prove fatal if delayed by weather, equipment failure, or simple miscalculation of distance. The dangerous ocean secrets surrounding Charybdis extend beyond her individual threat to represent the sea's capacity to violate fundamental physical laws. The creature's ability to contain and expel volumes of water far larger than her physical form should allow suggests that her stomach existed in some dimension beyond normal space and time, a concept that ancient mythology handled with matter-of-fact acceptance, but that challenges modern understanding of how reality operates. Archaeological evidence from ancient Mediterranean harbors reveals defensive structures that make no sense unless they were designed to protect against sudden, massive water displacement events. These installations, including breakwaters positioned to redirect rather than simply block incoming waves, and harbor designs that incorporated multiple levels of protection against vertical water movement, suggest that coastal communities regularly dealt with phenomena matching ancient descriptions of Kuribdus's feeding cycles. What makes Kuribdus particularly unsettling from a modern perspective is how her behavior parallels contemporary understanding of oceanic phenomena that operate on scales beyond human comprehension. Massive underwater currents that can move billions of tons of water, oceanic breathing patterns that affect global weather systems, and deep-sea geological processes that can alter sea levels across entire regions, all demonstrate that the dangerous ocean operates according to principles that dwarf human experience. The creature's positioning opposite Sila in the narrow strait created the ultimate maritime nightmare, a passage where avoiding one lethal threat meant accepting exposure to another. This geographical arrangement wasn't coincidental, but represented a deliberate design by forces that understood human psychology well enough to create situations where rational decision-making becomes impossible. Sailors facing the choice between Sila's precision strikes and Kuribdus's total consumption often found themselves paralyzed by options that offered only different forms of destruction. Modern oceanographic research has identified real-world phenomena that echo ancient descriptions of Kuribdus with unsettling accuracy. Massive underwater sinkholes that can drain surface water with incredible speed, oceanic vortexes that operate on cycles measured in hours rather than the continuous rotation of typical whirlpools, and deep-sea geological features that suggest periodic massive displacement of water volumes, all demonstrate that the dangerous ocean contains forces that could easily inspire legends of living whirlpools. Perhaps most disturbing are the documented cases of what marine scientists call impossible water displacement events, incidents where large volumes of seawater vanish from specific locations without any apparent physical cause, only to return hours later in violent eruptions that defy conventional understanding of oceanic dynamics. These phenomena occur with statistical regularity in areas traditionally associated with Kuribdus mythology, suggesting that some aspects of the ancient terror may represent accurate observations of ongoing natural processes. The psychological impact of Kuribdus extends far beyond maritime contexts into fundamental questions about consumption, satisfaction, and the nature of appetite itself. The creature's eternal hunger represents fears about forces that can never be satisfied, needs that grow larger with feeding rather than smaller, and the terrifying possibility that some forms of consumption exist purely for their own sake, rather than serving any biological or logical purpose. Religious practices throughout the ancient Mediterranean incorporated Kuribdus-specific rituals that acknowledged the creature's cyclical nature and attempted to synchronize human activities with her feeding schedule. These weren't simple timing calculations, but complex theological negotiations with a force that existed partially outside normal temporal frameworks. Sailors would perform ceremonies designed to communicate their respect for the creature's territorial rights, and their understanding that safe passage required permission rather than simply good navigation. The dangerous ocean's capacity to generate Kuribdus-like phenomena appears to be increasing in modern times, possibly due to climate change effects on oceanic circulation patterns. Deep-sea monitoring stations have recorded increasing instances of massive water displacement events that follow cyclical patterns, reminiscent of ancient descriptions of the creature's feeding habits. These phenomena often occur in areas where shipping lanes pass through underwater geological formations that could theoretically channel and amplify natural water movements. Naval historians studying unexplained maritime disasters have identified patterns that suggest Kuribdus-type phenomena may be responsible for vessels that vanish completely without leaving debris fields or distress signals. Ships that disappear in calm weather from well-monitored waters, particularly in areas with complex underwater topography, often do so in ways that suggest rapid displacement into some form of contained space, rather than simple sinking or explosion. The creature's influence on human understanding of the dangerous ocean extends into contemporary discussions about forces that operate beyond human comprehension or control. Kuribdus represents the ultimate expression of the sea's capacity to become actively hostile to human presence, transforming from passive environment into active predator through mechanisms that transcend normal biological or physical categories. Modern shipping protocols in waters traditionally associated with Kuribdus include contingency plans that assume the possibility of sudden, massive water displacement events that could affect vessels across large areas simultaneously. These preparations acknowledge that some maritime threats operate on scales that make individual ship protection impossible, requiring instead regional coordination and acceptance that certain oceanic phenomena will overwhelm any defensive measures. What emerges from studying Kuribdus across millennia of human culture is an understanding of the dangerous ocean as a force that can violate the basic assumptions underlying human civilization. The creature represents not just physical threat but existential challenge, a reminder that some mythical sea creatures embody forms of consumption that exist beyond human categories of life, death, hunger, and satisfaction. The next time you observe the ocean's surface during changing tides, remember that beneath those seemingly predictable movements may lie forces capable of transforming the entire sea into a living throat, where the boundary between water and monster becomes meaningless, and where the dangerous ocean reveals its capacity to swallow not just ships and sailors, but the very concepts of space and time themselves. Story 6. Hydra, the unkillable serpent of poisoned waters. From the consuming vortex of Kuribdus, we now wade into the murky swamplands, where the dangerous ocean meets fresh water, in a toxic marriage that birthed one of mythology's most nightmarish examples of evolutionary perfection. This is the story of the Lernaean Hydra, a creature whose very existence challenges human understanding of death, regeneration, and the fundamental assumption that any problem can be solved through sufficient application of force and determination. The Hydra's domain wasn't the open sea, but the treacherous marshlands near Lerna, where brackish waters created an environment so poisonous that normal life couldn't survive, yet perfect for nurturing a monster whose every breath could kill, and whose blood could corrupt the earth itself for generations. This wasn't merely another serpent hiding in dangerous ocean waters. This was a creature born from the marriage of Typhon and Echidna, primordial forces of chaos whose offspring was designed to be literally unkillable by conventional means. What made the Hydra uniquely terrifying wasn't just its size or venomous nature, but its revolutionary approach to survival that turned conventional combat logic into a death trap for attackers. Where normal creatures died when decapitated, the Hydra would sprout 2 new heads from each severed neck, transforming every successful attack into an escalating nightmare that made the creature stronger rather than weaker. This regenerative capability represented more than just advanced healing. It was a fundamental violation of natural law that made traditional concepts of victory meaningless. Ancient texts describe the Hydra's heads with mathematical precision that suggests direct observation rather than imaginative storytelling. Each head possessed its own consciousness and hunting instincts, yet all were connected through a collective intelligence that allowed them to coordinate attacks with devastating efficiency. The creature could engage multiple opponents simultaneously, while remaining perfectly aware of threats approaching from any direction, making ambush tactics impossible and direct confrontation suicidal. The monster's venomous capabilities extended far beyond simple poison into realms of supernatural toxicity that could corrupt entire ecosystems. The Hydra's breath was so poisonous that it could kill birds flying overhead, while its blood was corrosive enough to eat through metal and stone. Most terrifying of all, one of its heads was immortal, immune to any form of damage, and capable of remaining conscious and aggressive even if separated from the body. This immortal head represented the creature's essential nature, an unstoppable force that would continue existing regardless of what happened to its physical form. The dangerous ocean secrets surrounding the Hydra extend beyond individual threat to represent the sea's capacity to create perfect biological weapons. The creature's swampland habitat demonstrated how marine environments could evolve into testing grounds, where normal evolutionary pressures were replaced by supernatural selection criteria that favored traits impossible in natural ecosystems. The Hydra wasn't just adapted to its environment, it had transformed that environment into an extension of itself. Archaeological evidence from sites near ancient Lerna reveals defensive structures that make no sense unless they were designed to contain rather than simply repel threats. Massive stone barriers extending deep into swampland areas, elaborate drainage systems designed to isolate specific water bodies, and ceremonial platforms positioned for what appears to be long-distance combat, all suggest that ancient communities invested enormous resources in managing a threat that couldn't be directly confronted. Heracles' eventual victory over the Hydra required more than heroic strength. It demanded a fundamental shift in tactical thinking that acknowledged the creature's regenerative nature and developed countermeasures specifically designed to exploit its unique vulnerabilities. The hero's use of fire to cauterize severed necks prevented regeneration, while burying the immortal head under a massive boulder represented acceptance that some aspects of the threat could only be contained, never truly eliminated. This victory established a template for dealing with seemingly impossible challenges that continues to influence human problem-solving strategies. The Hydra battle demonstrated that some threats require indirect approaches, that sometimes success means managing rather than eliminating danger, and that apparent weaknesses, the creature's multiple heads, could actually be sources of strength that made conventional attacks counterproductive. Modern marine biology has discovered phenomena that echo the Hydra's regenerative capabilities with unsettling accuracy. Certain deep-sea organisms can regenerate lost body parts with a completeness that approaches the mythological, while some marine species demonstrate collective intelligence patterns that allow individual components to operate independently while maintaining coordinated group behavior. These discoveries suggest that the dangerous ocean continues to evolve creatures whose capabilities challenge human understanding of biological possibility. Perhaps most disturbing are the documented cases of what marine scientists call escalating threat responses, situations where human attempts to control marine organisms or ecosystems result in adaptations that make the problems worse rather than better. Invasive species that become more aggressive when culled, toxic algae blooms that intensify when treated with conventional remedies, and coral diseases that spread faster when targeted with standard countermeasures, all demonstrate that the dangerous ocean contains forces that respond to human intervention by becoming more rather than less threatening. The Hydra's toxic legacy extends beyond its immediate physical threat into broader questions about environmental corruption and the long-term consequences of supernatural contamination. Ancient sources describe the areas around Lerna as remaining poisoned for generations after the creature's defeat, with soil and water that could kill animals and plants decades after the monster's blood had seeped into the ground. This ecological damage pattern provides a mythological framework for understanding how certain forms of marine pollution can create persistent environmental hazards that outlast their original sources. Religious practices throughout the ancient Mediterranean incorporated Hydra-specific rituals designed to prevent similar regenerative threats from emerging in local water systems. These ceremonies weren't attempts to combat existing monsters, but rather preventive measures aimed at ensuring that environmental conditions wouldn't support the evolution of creatures with similar capabilities. The rituals acknowledged that some threats were so dangerous that prevention was infinitely preferable to confrontation. The dangerous ocean's capacity to generate Hydra-like phenomena appears to be increasing in modern times, particularly in areas where human activity has created unusual chemical and biological conditions. Industrial pollution, agricultural runoff, and climate change effects have combined to create marine environments where normal evolutionary pressures are replaced by selection criteria that could theoretically favor organisms with enhanced regenerative capabilities and toxic defenses. Naval historians studying patterns of escalating maritime disasters have identified phenomena that suggest Hydra-type threats may be more common than traditionally recognized. Situations where initial responses to marine problems create larger problems, incidents where damage to oceanic systems results in more aggressive rather than weakened responses, and cases where pollution events seem to trigger the emergence of more dangerous rather than less dangerous marine organisms, all demonstrate that the dangerous ocean may be actively developing new forms of regenerative threats. The creature's influence on human psychology extends far beyond maritime contexts, into fundamental fears about problems that become worse when addressed directly. The Hydra represents the nightmare scenario where good intentions and logical responses create escalating disasters, where strength and determination become liabilities rather than assets, and where victory requires accepting that some aspects of the threat will remain permanently dangerous. Modern environmental management protocols increasingly incorporate Hydra principles that acknowledge the possibility of interventions that create worse problems than they solve. These approaches emphasize understanding complex system dynamics before implementing solutions, accepting that some environmental threats may require containment rather than elimination, and preparing for the possibility that successful short-term remedies might create long-term complications. What emerges from studying the Hydra across millennia of human culture is an understanding of the dangerous ocean as a force that can evolve countermeasures faster than human civilization can develop solutions. The creature represents not just physical threat but intellectual challenge, a reminder that some mythical sea creatures embody forms of adaptation that make conventional approaches to problem solving not just ineffective, but actively counterproductive. The next time you encounter murky waters where marine and terrestrial environments intersect, remember that such borderlands have historically generated the most dangerous ocean's most adaptive predators, creatures whose survival strategies transform human strengths into weaknesses, and whose very existence proves that some problems grow larger when attacked, requiring wisdom rather than force, patience rather than urgency, and acceptance that perfect solutions sometimes create perfect disasters. Story 7. Sirens, the psychological predators of perfect knowledge. From the regenerating nightmare of the Hydra, we now drift toward rocky islands, where the dangerous ocean's most insidious predators wait. These are creatures whose weapons aren't claws or teeth, but something far more deadly, the irresistible promise of forbidden knowledge. This is the story of the Sirens, beings whose very existence proves that the sea's greatest threats often come not from what tries to destroy us, but from what offers to give us exactly what we think we want most. The Sirens represent a form of maritime terror that transcends physical danger to target the human psyche itself. Unlike other mythical sea creatures that threaten ships with brute force or supernatural powers, the Sirens wielded a weapon that no armor could deflect and no courage could overcome. The promise of perfect knowledge, delivered through songs that revealed the deepest secrets of the universe. Their victims didn't die from violence. They died from voluntarily abandoning everything else, in pursuit of truths that proved more valuable than life itself. Homer's Odyssey provides the most detailed account of how these dangerous ocean predators operated, describing beings whose beautiful voices could penetrate any physical barrier, and whose songs contained information so compelling that listeners would sacrifice everything, ship, crew, family, future, for the chance to hear more. The Sirens didn't hunt through the water like conventional sea monsters. They created psychological gravity wells that drew victims to them with a force more powerful than any physical current. The transformation of the Sirens from their original bird-like forms to the more familiar mermaid imagery reflects the evolution of human understanding about the nature of their threat. Early depictions show creatures with wings, emphasizing their ability to transcend normal physical limitations and reach victims who thought themselves safe from marine predators. Later representations focused on their aquatic nature, suggesting that the dangerous ocean itself had claimed these beings and transformed them into perfect maritime hunters. What made the Sirens uniquely terrifying was their intimate knowledge of each individual who heard their songs. They didn't offer generic temptations, but precisely targeted psychological weapons, designed specifically for each listener's deepest desires and intellectual weaknesses. To Odysseus, they promised knowledge of all that had happened at Troy and all that would happen in the future. To other sailors, they offered different but equally irresistible revelations, tailored to each man's particular hunger for forbidden understanding. This personalization of the threat reveals something deeply unsettling about the Sirens' nature. They possessed comprehensive knowledge of human psychology and individual personal history that should have been impossible for any mortal being to acquire. Their songs demonstrated an understanding of their victims' lives, dreams, and fears that suggested either supernatural surveillance capabilities or access to some cosmic database of human experience that allowed them to weaponize each person's specific intellectual vulnerabilities. The dangerous ocean secrets surrounding the Sirens extend beyond their individual threat to represent the sea's capacity to transform knowledge itself into a form of predation. The creature's rocky island domain was littered with the bones of previous victims, creating a grotesque library where the remains of those who had sought ultimate knowledge served as permanent reminders of the cost of such pursuits. This wasn't random carnage, but systematic intellectual harvesting that accumulated over generations. Archaeological evidence from Mediterranean islands traditionally associated with siren activity reveals unusual concentrations of shipwreck debris that don't match normal patterns of maritime disaster. These sites show evidence of vessels that were deliberately sailed into dangerous waters, despite favorable weather conditions, suggesting that crews had voluntarily chosen to wreck their ships rather than experience typical storm-related accidents. The positioning of these wrecks indicates that the ships had been navigated with precision towards specific coastal features, as if following instructions rather than fleeing threats. Modern psychological research has identified phenomena that echo ancient descriptions of siren encounters with unsettling accuracy. Studies of information addiction, the compulsive pursuit of knowledge that becomes self-destructive, and the ways that certain types of revelation can trigger complete abandonment of survival instincts, all demonstrate that the human mind contains vulnerabilities that could theoretically be exploited by entities capable of delivering precisely targeted intellectual temptations. The sirens' use of music as a delivery mechanism for their psychological weapons reveals sophisticated understanding of how sound can bypass rational defenses and directly access emotional and intellectual centers of the brain. Modern neuroscience has confirmed that certain musical patterns can trigger involuntary responses, alter consciousness, and create psychological states where normal decision-making processes become compromised. The dangerous ocean provided the perfect acoustic environment for such sonic manipulation, with rocky coastlines that could amplify and focus sound waves in ways that maximize their psychological impact. Perhaps most disturbing is how the siren's threat operated through the corruption of positive human traits, rather than exploitation of obvious weaknesses. Curiosity, the desire for knowledge, and the pursuit of truth, qualities that drive human advancement and discovery, became weapons in the creature's hands. This inversion of virtue into vulnerability suggests that the dangerous ocean contains forces capable of transforming humanity's greatest strengths into sources of destruction. The famous solution employed by Odysseus, having his crew plug their ears while he listened while bound to the ship's mast, reveals the fundamental paradox of the siren threat. Knowledge of their danger wasn't sufficient protection. Only complete sensory isolation or physical restraint could prevent their songs from overwhelming rational judgment. This suggests that the siren's power operated below the level of conscious resistance, targeting neurological and psychological mechanisms that functioned independently of intellectual understanding. Religious practices throughout the ancient Mediterranean incorporated siren-specific rituals designed to protect travelers from intellectual temptation rather than physical danger. These ceremonies emphasized mental discipline, collective decision-making that prevented individual crew members from making unilateral choices, and spiritual preparations that strengthened resistance to supernatural revelation. The rituals acknowledged that some threats could only be countered through psychological rather than physical defenses. Modern shipping in areas traditionally associated with siren activity has documented phenomena that echo ancient accounts with disturbing consistency. Radio equipment picking up transmissions that seem to contain personally relevant information despite originating from empty waters, navigation systems that begin displaying course corrections toward dangerous coastal areas without operator input, and crew members reporting compelling urges to alter course towards specific geographical features that offer no obvious advantages. The dangerous ocean's capacity to generate siren-like phenomena may be increasing in modern times due to the proliferation of information technology and humanity's growing dependence on data systems. Electronic navigation and communication equipment could theoretically be compromised by entities capable of exploiting human psychological vulnerabilities through technological interfaces, creating modern versions of the ancient siren threat that operate through digital rather than acoustic means. Naval historians studying patterns of unexplained course deviations have identified incidents where experienced crews have made navigation decisions that directly contradict safety protocols and common sense, often leading their vessels toward dangerous coastal areas during favorable weather conditions. These events frequently involve crews who report receiving what they believe to be important navigational information or emergency communications that subsequent investigation proves never existed. The sirens' influence on human psychology extends far beyond maritime contexts, into contemporary concerns about information warfare, the weaponization of curiosity, and the ways that the pursuit of knowledge can become compulsive and self-destructive. The creatures represent a form of predation that exploits the very qualities that make humans successful as a species, suggesting that evolution may have created vulnerabilities that are invisible until targeted by sufficiently sophisticated predators. Modern cybersecurity protocols increasingly incorporate siren principles that acknowledge how information itself can be weaponized, and how the promise of valuable knowledge can be used to override normal security instincts. These approaches recognize that some threats operate through psychological manipulation rather than technical exploitation, targeting human judgment rather than system vulnerabilities. What emerges from studying the sirens across millennia of human culture is an understanding of the dangerous ocean as a realm where knowledge and ignorance, wisdom and folly, revelation and destruction exist in relationships so complex that they defy simple categorization. The creatures represent not just intellectual threat, but epistemological warning, a reminder that some mythical sea creatures embody forms of truth that are literally too dangerous for human minds to process safely. The next time you hear beautiful music drifting across water, or encounter information that seems too perfect, too personally relevant, too comprehensive to be coincidental, remember that the dangerous ocean has always harbored predators whose weapons are crafted from our deepest desires for understanding. These are creatures whose songs promise to reveal everything we think we want to know, at the cost of everything we need to survive. Story 8. Kraken, the Island That Thinks. From the psychological predators that hunt through song, we now descend into the deepest waters of the North Atlantic, where Norse mythology birthed the ultimate expression of the dangerous ocean's capacity to disguise apocalyptic threats as natural features. This is the story of the Kraken, a creature so massive that it challenges human understanding of the difference between living being and geological formation, a monster whose very existence transforms the fundamental assumptions underlying maritime navigation and survival. The Kraken represents something far more terrifying than a simple sea monster. It embodies the dangerous ocean's capacity to make the very seafloor a predator. Unlike other mythical sea creatures that could be seen approaching or avoided through careful navigation, the Kraken's hunting strategy relied on appearing to be something safe: an island, a shallow bank, or a convenient place to anchor and rest. By the time sailors realized their mistake, they had already committed themselves to destruction in ways that made escape impossible. Norwegian and Greenlandic sailors' accounts from the 13th century describe encounters with what they initially believed to be uncharted islands, landmasses that appeared on no maps but offered apparent refuge from storms or convenient stopping points for repairs and resupply. These so-called islands would remain stable for hours or even days, allowing crews to explore, establish camps, and begin to trust their safety. Only when the Kraken began to submerge would the horrifying truth become apparent. They had been living on the back of a creature whose size dwarfed their understanding of what life could achieve. The mathematical implications of the Kraken's described dimensions challenge basic assumptions about marine biology and physics. Ancient texts describe creatures a mile or more in diameter, beings whose tentacles could crush the largest ships like twigs, while their main body remained largely submerged. At such scales, the Kraken wouldn't just be a predator, it would be a mobile ecosystem, a living landscape capable of supporting entire communities of parasitic and symbiotic organisms that would themselves be larger than most known sea creatures. What made the Kraken uniquely terrifying was its intelligence and patience. Unlike reactive predators that struck when hungry or threatened, the Kraken demonstrated strategic thinking that spanned decades or centuries. Some accounts suggest that individual Kraken would maintain the same island appearance in specific locations for generations, becoming familiar landmarks to local fishing communities before eventually revealing their true nature in feeding events that would eliminate entire fleets simultaneously. The creature's hunting methods revealed a sophisticated understanding of human psychology and maritime behavior. By appearing as geographical features rather than living threats, the Kraken exploited humanity's fundamental need to trust the stability of land masses. The monster understood that sailors desperately sought refuge from the dangerous ocean's storms and uncertainties, making them vulnerable to any apparent sanctuary that offered rest and safety. Archaeological evidence from North Atlantic coastal communities reveals defensive strategies that make sense only if they were designed to counter threats disguised as geographical features. Ancient harbors with elaborate authentication systems for verifying the stability of nearby landmasses, navigational techniques that emphasize timing and observation periods before committing to landfall, and religious practices focused on blessing the ground before establishing any temporary camps, all suggest that the threat of false islands was considered very real. The dangerous ocean secrets surrounding the Kraken extend beyond individual encounters to represent the sea's capacity to weaponize human survival instincts. The creature's existence meant that sailors couldn't trust their most basic navigational assumptions, that land was solid, that islands were stationary, and that geographical features remained constant over time. This epistemological uncertainty transformed every aspect of maritime travel into potential deception. Modern oceanographic research has discovered phenomena that echo ancient Kraken descriptions with unsettling accuracy. Massive cephalopods whose size approaches the lower bounds of mythological accounts, underwater formations that shift position in ways that suggest biological rather than geological activity, and sonar contacts that appear to show island-sized objects moving through deep water at impossible speeds, all demonstrate that the dangerous ocean contains forces that could easily inspire legends of living land masses. Perhaps most disturbing are the documented cases of what marine scientists call temporary seafloor elevation events, incidents where large areas of ocean floor suddenly rise toward the surface before submerging again, creating temporary shallow areas that can persist for days or weeks before disappearing. These phenomena occur in patterns that suggest coordination rather than random geological activity, and they're often accompanied by unusual marine life concentrations that could theoretically support temporary ecosystem development. The Kraken's ability to create whirlpools during submerging or surfacing represents another form of geographical weaponization that transforms natural oceanic movements into active threats. Ancient accounts describe vortexes so massive that they could drag down entire fleets, not through the localized suction of traditional whirlpools, but through systematic water displacement that affected ocean currents across vast areas. This suggests that the Kraken's movements could alter regional oceanographic patterns in ways that made survival impossible for any vessel within miles of its position. Religious practices throughout Scandinavian coastal communities incorporated Kraken-specific rituals designed to authenticate geographical features before trusting them for navigation or shelter. These ceremonies weren't simple blessings, but sophisticated verification procedures that tested the stability and authenticity of land masses through methods that acknowledged the possibility of massive biological deception. Sailors would perform observational protocols spanning multiple tidal cycles, conduct specific tests for biological responses to stimuli, and maintain communication with multiple vessels to verify that apparent islands appeared consistent across different observers. Modern shipping protocols in traditional Kraken waters include contingency procedures that echo ancient verification methods. Electronic navigation systems are programmed to flag any geographical features that don't match historical charts. Sonar equipment is configured to detect biological signatures that might indicate living rather than geological formations. And communication protocols require confirmation of landmark positions through multiple independent sources before vessels commit to approaches that would make rapid escape difficult. The dangerous ocean's capacity to generate Kraken-like phenomena appears to be increasing in modern times, possibly due to climate change effects on deep-sea ecosystems and the migration patterns of large marine organisms. Deepwater monitoring stations have recorded increasing instances of massive biological contacts moving in coordinated patterns that suggest intelligence and purpose rather than random marine life behavior. Naval historians studying patterns of unexplained maritime disappearances have identified incidents where entire fleets have vanished from areas where they were reportedly anchored near charted islands or shallow banks. Subsequent investigations often reveal that the supposed geographical features either don't exist or show evidence of recent massive displacement, suggesting that crews may have encountered modern versions of the ancient Kraken deception. The creature's influence on human psychology extends far beyond maritime contexts into fundamental questions about trust, perception, and the reliability of sensory experience. The Kraken represents the ultimate violation of environmental trust, the transformation of apparent safety into actual danger through deception, so sophisticated that detection requires methods beyond normal human observation capabilities. Modern environmental management increasingly incorporates Kraken principles that acknowledge the possibility of large-scale biological systems that operate according to intelligence patterns rather than simple ecological dynamics. These approaches recognize that some marine phenomena may represent coordinated behavior by entities too large or too alien for humans to easily recognize as living beings, rather than environmental features. What emerges from studying the Kraken across millennia of human culture is an understanding of the dangerous ocean as a realm where the boundary between living and non-living, predator and landscape, safety and destruction can become meaningless in ways that challenge the fundamental assumptions underlying human survival strategies. The creature represents not just physical threat but perceptual challenge, a reminder that some mythical sea creatures embody forms of intelligence that operate on scales beyond human comprehension. The next time you approach an uncharted island or convenient anchorage that seems too perfect for your current needs, remember that the dangerous ocean has always harbored predators whose hunting strategies involve becoming the very landscape you seek for shelter, creatures whose patience spans centuries, and whose understanding of human psychology allows them to transform our greatest survival instincts into perfectly crafted traps that reveal themselves only when escape has become impossible. Story 9. Jörmungandr, the world serpent that embraces apocalypse. From the deceptive islands of the Kraken, we now encounter a creature so vast that it transcends the very concept of individual threat to become a geological force that shapes the dangerous ocean itself. This is the story of Jörmungandr, the Midgard Serpent whose coils encircle the entire world beneath the waves, a being whose mere existence makes every maritime journey an expedition across the back of a creature, capable of ending reality as we know it. Jörmungandr represents the ultimate expression of the dangerous ocean's capacity to harbor threats that operate on cosmic rather than merely maritime scales. Born of Loki and the giantess Angrboda, this serpentine offspring grew so large that Odin himself feared its potential and cast it into the world ocean, where it would grow until its body completely encircled Midgard, the realm of humanity. Unlike other mythical sea creatures that threatened individual ships or coastal communities, Jörmungandr's very breathing could alter global weather patterns, and its movements could trigger earthquakes and tsunamis across continents. The Norse concept of a serpent large enough to encircle the world while biting its own tail creates a creature whose anatomy defies conventional understanding of biological possibility. Ancient texts describe a being whose body forms the very boundary between the known world and the chaotic waters beyond, suggesting that Jörmungandr doesn't simply inhabit the dangerous ocean. It is the dangerous ocean's fundamental structure, the living border that separates ordered reality from primordial chaos. What makes Jörmungandr uniquely terrifying among world mythology's cosmic creatures is its active malevolence toward the established order. While other world-spanning entities might be indifferent to human existence, the Midgard Serpent harbors specific enmity toward the gods and their creation. Its prophesied role in Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, positions it not just as a passive threat, but as an active agent of cosmic destruction, whose awakening will trigger the end of the current universal order. The creature's relationship with Thor, the god of thunder, represents one of mythology's most psychologically complex divine antagonisms. Their mutual hatred extends beyond simple conflict to encompass a cosmic necessity. Both beings are destined to destroy each other during Ragnarok, suggesting that the resolution of their conflict requires the mutual annihilation of protective and destructive forces. This mythological framework implies that some threats are so fundamental that they can only be ended through the sacrifice of the very forces attempting to contain them. Archaeological evidence from Scandinavian coastal sites reveals defensive structures and religious practices that acknowledge the reality of world-spanning oceanic threats. Massive stone circles positioned to monitor ocean horizons, ceremonial sites designed for rituals that span multiple lunar cycles, and defensive installations that seem designed to detect, rather than repel, cosmic-scale movements, all suggest that ancient Nordic cultures considered Jörmungandr's presence a measurable and monitorable phenomenon. The dangerous ocean secrets surrounding Jörmungandr extend beyond mythological symbolism to represent ancient understanding of how global oceanic systems operate as unified entities. The serpent's world-encircling form mirrors real oceanographic phenomena, like the global thermohaline circulation that connects all of Earth's oceans in a single, planet-spanning current system. This global conveyor belt of ocean circulation operates on timescales and geographic scales that could easily inspire legends of a living creature whose movements affect worldwide climate and geological stability. Modern oceanographic research has confirmed that the world's oceans do indeed operate as a single, interconnected system, whose behavior can trigger cascading effects across the entire planet. Changes in deep water circulation patterns, shifts in major current systems, and variations in ocean temperature distribution can all generate consequences that span multiple continents and persist for decades or centuries. These discoveries suggest that ancient Norse storytellers may have been describing real phenomena through mythological metaphors. Perhaps most unsettling is how Jörmungandr's mythological behavior parallels contemporary concerns about oceanic tipping points and climate change feedback loops. The serpent's prophesied awakening during Ragnarok echoes modern scientific warnings about oceanic systems that could shift rapidly from stable to chaotic states, triggering irreversible global changes that would fundamentally alter the conditions supporting human civilization. The creature's venomous nature adds another dimension to its cosmic threat. Unlike terrestrial serpents, whose poison affects individual victims, Jörmungandr's venom was described as capable of corrupting entire atmospheric systems. During Ragnarok, the serpent would spew poison into the sky itself, creating toxic clouds that would make the air unbreathable across vast regions. This atmospheric poisoning concept anticipates modern understanding of how oceanic changes can affect global air quality and atmospheric composition. Religious practices throughout Scandinavia incorporated Jörmungandr-specific rituals, designed to monitor and potentially influence the serpent's movements. These weren't attempts to control the creature. Norse mythology acknowledged that such efforts were futile, but rather sophisticated early warning systems designed to detect signs of cosmic-scale awakening. Viking expeditions carried specific observational protocols for detecting changes in ocean behavior that might indicate the serpent's stirring, and coastal communities maintained ritual schedules synchronized with oceanic cycles that could theoretically influence global serpentine movements. The dangerous ocean's capacity to generate Jörmungandr-like phenomena has become increasingly relevant in modern times, as climate scientists document how oceanic changes can trigger rapid, irreversible shifts in global systems. The collapse of major ice sheets, the shutdown of critical ocean currents, and the release of methane deposits from warming seafloors all represent oceanic events that could generate worldwide consequences, reminiscent of the Midgard Serpent's prophesied awakening. Naval historians studying patterns of global maritime disasters have identified correlations between major oceanic events and subsequent cascades of seemingly unrelated incidents across multiple ocean basins. These patterns suggest that the world's oceans may indeed operate as unified systems, where disturbances in one region can trigger responses that propagate around the globe in ways that echo ancient descriptions of the world serpent's movements. The creature's influence on human psychology extends far beyond maritime contexts, into fundamental questions about global interconnectedness and the possibility of threats that transcend local or regional response capabilities. Jörmungandr represents humanity's deepest fears about forces so large and fundamental that they cannot be fought, only experienced as cosmic events that reshape the basic conditions of existence. Modern environmental monitoring systems increasingly operate according to principles that echo ancient Norse approaches to detecting Jörmungandr's movements. Global networks of oceanic sensors, satellite monitoring of worldwide current patterns, and computer models that track how local changes propagate through interconnected systems all represent sophisticated versions of the early warning systems that Viking cultures developed to monitor cosmic-scale threats. The serpent's tail-biting posture, the Ouroboros symbol that represents eternal cycles of creation and destruction, provides a mythological framework for understanding how oceanic systems operate through feedback loops that can either stabilize or destabilize global conditions. This cyclical nature suggests that the dangerous ocean contains self-regulating mechanisms that periodically reset global systems through processes that might appear catastrophic from human perspectives, but represent natural cycles from cosmic viewpoints. What emerges from studying Jörmungandr across millennia of human culture is an understanding of the dangerous ocean as a planetary-scale organism whose health and behavior affect every aspect of global environmental stability. The creature represents not just physical threat but systemic warning, a reminder that some mythical sea creatures embody forces so fundamental that they operate at the level of planetary life support systems. The next time you consider the ocean's role in global climate and environmental stability, remember that ancient Norse wisdom recognized the seas as the domain of a serpent whose movements could end the world, a mythological framework that anticipated modern understanding of how oceanic changes can trigger cascading effects that reshape the basic conditions supporting life on Earth. In the dangerous ocean's deepest currents, the world serpent's coils continue their eternal circulation, holding together the very fabric of global environmental systems, while harboring the power to unravel them through processes that transform myth into geological and climatological reality. Story 10. Tiamat, the primordial mother of chaotic waters. From the world-spanning coils of Jörmungandr, we now descend into the very origins of creation itself, where Mesopotamian mythology reveals the most fundamental truth about the dangerous ocean. It existed before the gods, before order, before the very concept of safety had meaning. This is the story of Tiamat, the primordial saltwater goddess, whose essence embodies the sea's capacity to create and destroy on scales that dwarf all other mythical sea creatures, a being whose very existence represents the dangerous ocean's role as the source from which all life emerges, and to which all life must eventually return. Tiamat represents something far more terrifying than a mere sea monster. She is the dangerous ocean personified as a conscious entity capable of creating entire universes or reducing them to primordial chaos at will. In the Mesopotamian creation epic Enuma Elish, she appears not as a creature dwelling within the waters, but as the waters themselves made manifest, the living embodiment of the salt sea's infinite creative and destructive potential. To encounter Tiamat is to face the dangerous ocean in its most fundamental form, consciousness older than reality, power that predates the very concepts of life and death. The ancient Mesopotamian understanding of Tiamat reveals sophisticated insight into the dangerous ocean's dual nature as both womb and tomb of existence. She represents the primordial waters from which the first gods emerged, yet also the chaotic force that seeks to reclaim all creation and return it to the undifferentiated state that existed before the cosmic order was imposed. This paradox, mother and destroyer, creator and consumer, captures the essential ambiguity that makes the dangerous ocean both life-giving and apocalyptically threatening. What makes Tiamat uniquely terrifying among world mythology's primordial deities is her active malevolence toward the ordered universe that emerged from her essence. Unlike creator deities who take pride in their creations, Tiamat grows to despise the cosmos that developed from her waters, viewing the establishment of divine hierarchies and natural laws as a betrayal of the primordial chaos that represents her true nature. Her war against the younger gods represents the dangerous ocean's eternal conflict with any force that attempts to impose structure upon its fluid, ever-changing essence. The creature's ability to spawn monstrous offspring specifically designed for cosmic warfare reveals the dangerous ocean's capacity to evolve weapons perfectly adapted to any conceivable threat. Tiamat's children weren't random monsters, but precisely engineered instruments of destruction. Serpents with venom that could corrupt divine essence, dragons whose roars could shatter the foundations of reality, and hybrid creatures that combine the most lethal aspects of multiple predatory species. This biological weaponization demonstrates how the dangerous ocean can transform its life-creating power into apocalyptic threat through selective breeding of nightmare entities. Archaeological evidence from ancient Mesopotamian sites reveals defensive structures and religious practices that acknowledge Tiamat's ongoing threat to cosmic stability. Massive temples positioned to monitor oceanic horizons, ceremonial complexes designed for rituals spanning multiple seasonal cycles, and defensive installations that seem oriented toward containing, rather than simply repelling aquatic threats, all suggest that Mesopotamian cultures considered the primordial sea goddess an active and present danger rather than merely a mythological memory. The dangerous ocean secrets surrounding Tiamat extend beyond individual mythology to represent ancient understanding of how oceanic systems operate as the fundamental life support mechanism for planetary existence. Her role as the source of all divine power mirrors the reality that oceanic processes regulate global climate, generate weather patterns, and maintain the chemical balance that makes terrestrial life possible. This suggests that ancient Mesopotamian storytellers understood the seas as conscious entities whose decisions could determine the fate of entire civilizations. Modern oceanographic research has confirmed that the world's oceans do indeed operate as the primary regulatory system for planetary environmental conditions. Oceanic circulation patterns, chemical cycles, and thermal regulation systems all demonstrate that the seas function as a unified entity capable of maintaining stable conditions for millions of years, or triggering rapid changes that could eliminate most terrestrial life. These discoveries validate the ancient understanding of oceanic waters as forces whose behavior determines the fundamental conditions supporting existence. Perhaps most unsettling is how Tiamat's mythological conflict with Marduk, the god who ultimately defeats her by splitting her body to form heaven and earth, parallels contemporary environmental tensions between human technological civilization and oceanic systems. The ancient myth describes cosmic warfare between forces of chaos and order, with victory requiring the physical dismemberment and reorganization of the primordial sea goddess, a framework that anticipates modern humanity's attempts to control and exploit oceanic resources. The creature's association with saltwater specifically positions her as the dangerous ocean's representative, in opposition to freshwater systems that support terrestrial life. This distinction suggests that ancient Mesopotamians understood the fundamental difference between oceanic waters that exist independent of human civilization and terrestrial waters that have been integrated into agricultural and urban systems. Tiamat represents the untamed sea that refuses integration into human-controlled environments. Religious practices throughout Mesopotamia incorporated Tiamat-specific rituals designed to acknowledge her continuing presence and power despite her mythological defeat. These ceremonies weren't celebrations of victory, but careful diplomatic negotiations with a force that had been contained rather than destroyed. The rituals recognized that Tiamat's essence continued to exist within every oceanic system, and that her potential for resurrection remained constant as long as salt water existed anywhere in the world. The dangerous ocean's capacity to generate Tiamat-like phenomena has become increasingly apparent in modern times, as oceanic systems respond to climate change through behaviors that seem almost consciously hostile to human civilization. Rising sea levels that threaten coastal cities, intensifying storm systems that exceed historical parameters, and oceanic acidification that disrupts marine ecosystems all demonstrate the dangerous ocean's capacity to reclaim territories and resources that humanity considered permanently secure. Naval historians studying ancient maritime disasters have identified patterns that suggest Mesopotamian sailors regularly encountered phenomena that could easily inspire legends of primordial sea goddesses. Massive storm systems that seemed to exhibit intelligent coordination, oceanic conditions that appeared to respond to human presence with increasing hostility, and marine life behaviors that suggested communication with some overarching oceanic consciousness all represent experiences that would naturally be interpreted as encounters with Tiamat's continuing presence. The creature's influence on human psychology extends far beyond maritime contexts into fundamental questions about humanity's relationship with the natural forces that created and sustained terrestrial life. Tiamat represents the possibility that the dangerous ocean retains memory of its primordial state and actively resents the emergence of land-based civilizations that depend upon but cannot control oceanic systems. Modern environmental management increasingly operates according to principles that acknowledge oceanic systems as entities whose behavior cannot be predicted through purely mechanical models. Climate scientists now recognize that the world's oceans exhibit emergent properties and feedback behaviors that suggest system-level intelligence operating at scales beyond human comprehension, characteristics that echo ancient descriptions of Tiamat's conscious hostility toward cosmic order. The creature's role in creating the universe through her defeat and dismemberment provides a mythological framework for understanding how human civilization depends upon the continued suppression of oceanic chaos. The ordered world that supports human existence literally requires the ongoing containment of forces that could return everything to primordial fluidity. This suggests that every human achievement represents a temporary victory in an eternal struggle against the dangerous ocean's tendency toward entropy and dissolution. What emerges from studying Tiamat across millennia of human culture is an understanding of the dangerous ocean as the fundamental force that both creates and threatens all existence. The creature represents not just physical threat but existential challenge, a reminder that some mythical sea creatures embody powers so basic to the structure of reality that they cannot be defeated, only temporarily managed through careful negotiation and constant vigilance. The next time you stand before the ocean and feel its immense power and age, remember that ancient wisdom recognized these waters as the domain of consciousness older than the gods themselves, a primordial intelligence that created the world through its own sacrifice, but retains the power to reclaim everything it has given, transforming order back into the beautiful, terrifying chaos from which all existence originally emerged. In the dangerous ocean's deepest currents flows the essence of Tiamat, the mother whose love and rage operate on scales that make human concepts of protection and threat seem like temporary ripples on an infinite sea. Story 11. Umi Bozu, the Phantom Monk of Storm, Cursed Waters. From the primordial chaos of Tiamat, we now navigate into the deceptively calm waters around Japan, where the dangerous ocean conceals one of its most psychologically complex predators, a being whose very existence transforms the concept of peaceful seas into a trap more deadly than any storm. This is the story of the Umi Bozu, a creature whose massive monk-like form emerges from mirror-still waters to present travelers with choices that ensure destruction, regardless of which option they select. The Umi Bozu represents the dangerous ocean's mastery of psychological warfare through the weaponization of false calm. Unlike other mythical sea creatures that announce their presence through obvious threats, roaring, thrashing, or displays of supernatural power, the Umi Bozu emerges during periods of perfect tranquility, when the sea appears safest and most inviting. This timing isn't coincidental, but represents sophisticated understanding of when human psychological defenses are most vulnerable to manipulation. Japanese folklore describes the creature as a massive, bald-headed phantom whose appearance varies depending on the observer's cultural background and personal fears. To Buddhist fishermen, it appears as a corrupted monk whose spiritual practices have transformed him into something that violates the natural order. To Shinto practitioners, it manifests as a kami spirit whose connection to water has become twisted into malevolent obsession. This shape-shifting quality suggests that the Umi Bozu doesn't possess a fixed physical form, but rather presents itself as whatever image will be most psychologically destabilizing to its specific audience. What makes the Umi Bozu uniquely terrifying among maritime supernatural entities is its systematic approach to creating no-win scenarios for anyone who encounters it. The creature's standard procedure involves rising from perfectly calm seas and politely requesting barrels of water from passing vessels. This request seems absurd. Why would a sea spirit need containers of the very element it inhabits? But the alternatives offered ensure that rational analysis becomes impossible under the pressure of immediate decision-making. Compliance with the Umi Bozu's request leads to disaster through supernatural physics that violate basic principles of buoyancy and displacement. The barrels, when filled and offered to the creature, somehow contain more water than the ship's hull can support, causing immediate catastrophic flooding. Refusal to provide the requested water triggers even more direct destruction, as the creature demonstrates its power by creating localized tsunamis or simply crushing vessels with its massive hands. The dangerous ocean secrets surrounding the Umi Bozu extend beyond individual encounters to represent the sea's capacity to transform spiritual practices into supernatural threats. Japanese Buddhist traditions acknowledge that intensive meditation and religious practice near water can sometimes result in practitioners developing unhealthy attachments to oceanic environments. The Umi Bozu may represent the culmination of such spiritual corruption. Monks whose dedication to understanding water's nature has led them to merge with the dangerous ocean in ways that preserve consciousness while eliminating human compassion. Archaeological evidence from Japanese coastal temples reveals architectural features and religious practices specifically designed to prevent the spiritual transformations that could create Umi Bozu-type entities. Meditation chambers positioned to avoid direct oceanic views, ritual schedules that limit extended contact with marine environments, and ceremonial protocols for monks who work near dangerous ocean waters all suggest that Buddhist communities considered the threat of oceanic spiritual corruption very real, rather than merely metaphorical. The creature's association with drowned monks provides a mythological framework for understanding how the dangerous ocean can preserve and corrupt human consciousness after death. Unlike simple drowning victims, whose spirits might find peace, the Umibōzu represents incomplete spiritual transformation, beings who achieved enough enlightenment to maintain individual consciousness, but not enough to escape attachment to the material world. This partial transcendence creates entities that possess supernatural power without spiritual wisdom. Modern psychological research has identified phenomena that echo ancient descriptions of Umibōzu encounters with disturbing accuracy. Studies of decision-making under extreme stress, the psychology of impossible choices, and the ways that religious or philosophical frameworks can create cognitive vulnerabilities all demonstrate that human minds contain exploitable weaknesses that could theoretically be targeted by entities capable of presenting precisely crafted psychological dilemmas. Perhaps most unsettling is how the Umibōzu's emergence from calm waters parallels contemporary understanding of how oceanic systems can shift rapidly from stable to chaotic states without warning. Modern meteorology has documented cases where perfectly tranquil seas can generate sudden, localized weather events that seem to violate established patterns of storm formation and development. These phenomena suggest that the dangerous ocean contains forces capable of creating exactly the type of deceptive calm that the Umibōzu exploits. The creature's specific targeting of nighttime travelers reveals sophisticated understanding of how darkness affects human judgment and psychological vulnerability. Night voyages, when navigation depends heavily on starlight and when crews are already operating under stress from reduced visibility, create optimal conditions for encounters that exploit cognitive limitations and decision-making errors. The Umibōzu's timing demonstrates an almost scientific understanding of when human psychological defenses are most compromised. Religious practices throughout coastal Japan incorporated Umibōzu-specific rituals designed to detect and potentially appease phantom monk encounters. These ceremonies weren't attempts to prevent such meetings, but rather preparations that acknowledge their inevitability and develop strategies for surviving them with minimal spiritual and physical damage. Fishermen would carry specific types of containers, perform prescribed responses to supernatural requests, and maintain spiritual disciplines designed to protect against psychological manipulation by corrupted religious entities. The dangerous ocean's capacity to generate Umibōzu-like phenomena appears to be increasing in modern times, particularly in areas where traditional Buddhist practices have been disrupted by technological change and urbanization. Reports of unexplained encounters with monk-like figures in marine environments, sudden flooding events that seem to violate physical laws, and psychological experiences that suggest contact with entities possessing religious knowledge, combined with malevolent intent, all indicate that some aspects of the ancient terror may persist in forms adapted to contemporary conditions. Naval historians studying patterns of maritime psychological incidents have identified cases where experienced crews report encounters with religious figures who present impossible choices in marine environments. These incidents often occur during periods of perfect weather when normal psychological stress factors are minimal, yet they result in decision-making errors that lead to navigation problems, equipment failures, or crew behavioral anomalies that persist long after the initial encounter. The creature's influence on Japanese maritime culture extends far beyond immediate encounters to shape how coastal communities approach the relationship between spiritual practice and oceanic activity. The Umibōzu represents the dangerous ocean's capacity to corrupt even the most positive human impulses, religious devotion, desire for enlightenment, attempts to understand natural forces, into threats that target the very communities that produce them. Modern shipping protocols in traditional Umibōzu waters include contingency procedures that acknowledge the possibility of encounters with entities that present psychological rather than physical threats. Training programs for crews operating in these areas emphasize decision-making under supernatural stress, protocols for responding to impossible requests, and psychological preparations for maintaining rational thought processes when confronted by phenomena that challenge basic assumptions about reality. The creature's shadowy, ever-changing appearance serves as a metaphor for how the dangerous ocean can present threats that adapt perfectly to individual psychological vulnerabilities. Unlike fixed monsters that can be recognized and avoided, the Umibōzu represents the sea's ability to generate customized nightmares that exploit each observer's specific fears, cultural background, and spiritual beliefs in ways that make conventional defense strategies ineffective. What emerges from studying the Umibōzu across centuries of Japanese maritime culture is an understanding of the dangerous ocean as a realm where spiritual corruption and supernatural manipulation converge to create threats that operate through psychological rather than physical violence. The creature represents not just individual menace, but systematic warning, a reminder that some mythical sea creatures embody the sea's capacity to transform humanity's highest aspirations into perfectly crafted instruments of destruction. The next time you find yourself on perfectly calm waters at night, especially in areas where religious traditions intersect with maritime activity, remember that such tranquility may be the dangerous ocean's most sophisticated trap. A moment of deceptive peace designed to lower your psychological defenses before presenting you with choices that ensure destruction, regardless of which path you select. In the mirror still surface of nighttime seas, the Umibōzu waits with infinite patience, ready to transform your deepest spiritual beliefs into weapons perfectly designed to exploit your individual path toward enlightenment or damnation. Story 12. Kappa, the Child, Size Demons of Deceptive Waters. From the massive phantom monk of open seas, we now wade into Japan's rivers and coastal shallows, where the dangerous ocean meets freshwater, in environments that harbor some of the most deceptively innocent, yet ruthlessly predatory creatures in all mythology. This is the story of the Kappa, beings whose childlike appearance and playful demeanor disguise a supernatural intelligence, dedicated to drowning humans through methods so methodical and ritualized that they transform simple water deaths into elaborate supernatural ceremonies. The Kappa represents the dangerous ocean's mastery of camouflage through innocence, creating predators whose appearance triggers protective rather than defensive instincts in potential victims. These turtle-like water demons, with their distinctive bowl-shaped heads that hold water and their apparent childlike proportions, present themselves as harmless curiosities that seem more likely to need help than to pose threats. This psychological misdirection makes them perhaps the most insidious of all mythical sea creatures, as they exploit humanity's instinct to protect the young and vulnerable. What makes the Kappa uniquely terrifying is their systematic approach to human predation that operates through elaborate rituals rather than simple violence. These creatures don't kill from hunger or territorial instinct, but rather seem to conduct their murders as religious ceremonies dedicated to extracting something called the shirikodama, a mythical organ supposedly located within the human body that contains the essence of life force. This extraction process requires the victim to be alive during the initial stages, making Kappa attacks, prolonged exercises, and supernatural torture. The dangerous ocean secrets surrounding Kappa extend beyond individual predation to represent the sea's capacity to create intelligent predators that understand human psychology well enough to exploit social conventions and cultural expectations. Kappa are described as masters of manipulation, who can engage in complex conversations, challenge humans to wrestling matches with predetermined rules, and even perform elaborate courtship rituals designed to lower victim defenses through the appearance of romantic interest. Japanese folklore attributes to Kappa an intelligence that rivals and sometimes exceeds human capabilities, particularly in areas related to medicine, engineering, and supernatural knowledge. Some legends describe Kappa who serve as advisors to human communities, trading valuable information about water management, herbal remedies, and agricultural techniques in exchange for specific types of offerings, usually cucumbers, which the creatures supposedly crave above all other foods. This beneficial relationship creates a complex moral framework where potential predators can also serve as valuable allies. The creature's dependence on the water contained in their head bowls provides a vulnerability that transforms encounters into strategic rather than purely physical challenges. If the water can be spilled through trickery, typically by exploiting the Kappa's compulsive politeness and tendency to bow when greeted, the creature becomes powerless, until the bowl can be refilled. This weakness suggests that dangerous ocean entities might possess inherent limitations that can be exploited by humans who understand their supernatural psychology. Archaeological evidence from Japanese river valleys and coastal plains reveals defensive structures and cultural practices that acknowledge Kappa as real and present threats, rather than merely cautionary tales. Stone barriers positioned to control water access to human settlements, architectural features designed to make riverside approaches difficult for small, agile creatures, and ritual sites where offerings were regularly made to appease water-dwelling entities all suggest that communities invested significant resources in managing Kappa-related threats. Modern psychological research has identified phenomena that echo ancient descriptions of Kappa behavior with unsettling accuracy. Studies of predators who use childlike appearance to approach victims, the psychology of trust building before betrayal, and the ways that seemingly innocent interactions can be used to assess and manipulate potential targets all demonstrate that human vulnerability to Kappa-type deception represents real rather than imaginary psychological weaknesses. Perhaps most disturbing is how the Kappa's blend of intelligence and malevolence creates predators that can adapt their hunting strategies to changing human behaviors and defensive measures. Unlike simple animals that operate through instinct, Kappa are described as learning from failed hunting attempts, developing new deception techniques, and even coordinating group strategies that allow multiple creatures to work together in complex predatory schemes. The creature's association with both river and ocean environments positions them as bridge entities that represent the dangerous ocean's influence, extending into freshwater systems that humans typically consider safer than open seas. Kappa demonstrate that oceanic threats don't respect the boundaries between salt and fresh water, suggesting that no aquatic environment can be assumed safe from supernatural predation. Religious practices throughout Japan incorporated Kappa-specific rituals designed to establish and maintain protective relationships with these potentially beneficial but inherently dangerous entities. These ceremonies acknowledge that Kappa couldn't be eliminated or avoided, but might be negotiated with through offerings, respect, and careful adherence to supernatural etiquette that recognize their territorial rights while protecting human interests. The dangerous ocean's capacity to generate Kappa-like phenomena appears to be evolving in modern times, as urbanization and industrial development alter the natural water systems where these creatures traditionally operated. Reports of childlike figures observed near water treatment facilities, swimming pools, and artificial water features suggest that Kappa may be adapting to human-modified aquatic environments in ways that bring them into more frequent contact with potential victims. Naval historians studying patterns of drowning incidents in Japanese waters have identified cases where experienced swimmers die in circumstances that suggest struggle with intelligent opponents rather than simple accidents. These incidents often occur in relatively shallow, calm waters where survival should have been easily achievable, yet victims show evidence of prolonged submersion and specific types of injuries that parallel ancient descriptions of Kappa attack methods. The creature's playful demeanor serves as a reminder that the dangerous ocean can weaponize positive human emotions and social instincts. The Kappa's apparent friendliness, curiosity, and desire for interaction all represent psychological tactics designed to overcome the natural wariness that might protect potential victims from more obviously threatening predators. This suggests that oceanic intelligence has evolved sophisticated understanding of how to exploit human social psychology. Modern environmental management increasingly acknowledges that aquatic ecosystems may harbor intelligent predators whose behavior patterns don't match conventional biological models. Research into animal intelligence, particularly among aquatic species, has revealed cognitive capabilities that approach or exceed human levels in specific areas, suggesting that creatures like Kappa might represent accurate observations of real phenomena rather than purely mythological constructs. The creature's specific interest in human internal organs, particularly the mythical Shirikodama, provides a framework for understanding how supernatural predators might value aspects of human biology that transcend simple nutritional needs. This suggests that dangerous ocean entities may be motivated by purposes that operate according to supernatural rather than biological imperatives, making their behavior unpredictable through conventional predator-prey models. What emerges from studying Kappa across centuries of Japanese culture is an understanding of the dangerous ocean as a source of intelligence that can perfectly mimic innocence while harboring predatory intentions that operate through psychological manipulation rather than obvious aggression. The creatures represent not just physical threat, but social warning, a reminder that some mythical sea creatures embody forms of intelligence that can exploit human protective instincts as effectively as human fears. The next time you encounter what appears to be a lost child near water, especially in areas where natural and artificial aquatic systems intersect, remember that the dangerous ocean has always harbored predators whose greatest weapon is their ability to appear harmless, vulnerable, and in need of exactly the kind of help that brings potential victims within reach of creatures whose childlike appearance conceals supernatural intelligence, dedicated to transforming human compassion into perfectly orchestrated death. Story 13. Aspidokeloni, the living island that devours trust. From the deceptive innocence of childlike Kappa, we now encounter perhaps the most patient and methodical predator ever conceived by human imagination. A creature whose hunting strategy operates on timescales measured in years rather than moments, and whose success depends not on speed or strength, but on humanity's fundamental need to trust the stability of land itself. This is the story of the Aspidoshalone, a being so massive that entire civilizations could mistake it for an island, so patient that it could support human settlements for generations, and so intelligent that it understood exactly when to reveal its true nature for maximum psychological and physical devastation. The Aspidoshalone represents the dangerous ocean's ultimate expression of deception through geographic mimicry, creating a predator that doesn't hunt individual victims, but entire communities through the weaponization of false sanctuary. Medieval European texts describe this creature as a whale or turtle of such immense proportions that forests could grow on its back, rivers could form in the depressions of its shell, and entire ecosystems could develop in the soil that accumulated over centuries of apparent geological stability. What makes the Aspidoshalone uniquely terrifying among mythical sea creatures is its willingness to sacrifice immediate gratification for long-term predatory success. Unlike other marine monsters that attack ships or coastal settlements directly, the Aspidoshalone would allow human communities to develop on its back over multiple generations, creating emotional and economic investments so profound that abandoning the island would represent the loss of everything that defined the settlers' identities and livelihoods. The creature's methodology reveals sophisticated understanding of human psychology and the ways that attachment to place can override survival instincts. By allowing communities to flourish for decades or even centuries, the Aspidoshalone created situations where the revelation of its true nature would generate not just physical terror, but existential crisis. Victims wouldn't just be losing their lives, they would be discovering that their entire understanding of reality had been carefully orchestrated deception. Medieval bestiaries describe the Aspidoshallone's ability to remain motionless for years at a time, allowing vegetation to take root and develop into complex ecosystems that would attract animals, birds, and eventually human explorers seeking new lands for settlement. This extraordinary patience suggests intelligence operating on geological rather than biological timescales, a consciousness that could plan centuries ahead and execute strategies that required maintaining deception across multiple human generations. The dangerous ocean secrets surrounding the Aspidoshalone extend beyond individual predation to represent the sea's capacity to challenge fundamental assumptions about the nature of solid ground and geographical stability. The creature embodies every maritime culture's deepest fear about the reliability of land itself, the possibility that what appears to be permanent geological foundation might actually be temporary illusion maintained by forces with their own agenda. Archaeological evidence from medieval European coastal communities reveals defensive and exploratory practices that suggest the Aspidoshalone threat was considered real rather than merely allegorical. Navigation techniques that emphasized long-term observation of potential landing sites, protocols for testing ground stability through specific rituals and measurements, and settlement patterns that avoided establishing permanent communities on newly discovered islands all indicate that medieval mariners took systematic precautions against creatures capable of geographic deception. The creature's name, meaning asp turtle, reflects its dual nature as both reptilian predator and toxic threat. Some legends describe the Aspidoshaloni as possessing venomous capabilities that could poison entire water systems when it finally chose to submerge, ensuring that even survivors of its initial deception would face ongoing contamination of their environment. This suggests that the creature's threat extended beyond the immediate drowning of settlements to include long-term ecological warfare against human communities. Modern geological research has identified phenomena that echo ancient descriptions of the Aspidoshaloni with unsettling accuracy. Volcanic islands that appear stable for decades before sudden submersion, massive underwater landslides that can alter seafloor topography without warning, and even biological formations like enormous coral reefs that can shift position over time, all demonstrate that the dangerous ocean contains forces capable of creating exactly the type of deceptive stability that the Aspidoshalon represents. Perhaps most disturbing is how the creature's hunting strategy parallels contemporary concerns about environmental deception and the reliability of seemingly stable ecological systems. Climate change has revealed that many geographical features previously considered permanent, ice sheets, coastlines, and even entire islands, can undergo rapid transformations that threaten communities whose entire existence depends on environmental stability. The Aspidoshalon's ability to attract other marine life through scent emissions creates an additional layer of deception that makes the creature's islands appear naturally abundant and ecologically healthy. Fish would gather around the creature in massive schools, birds would nest in the vegetation growing on its back, and the entire ecosystem would appear to thrive, all while serving as unknowing participants in an elaborate predatory scheme designed to convince human observers that they had discovered paradise. Religious interpretations of the Aspidoshaloni often portrayed it as a manifestation of Satan's ability to disguise evil as good, creating moral allegories about the danger of trusting appearances over spiritual discernment. Medieval Christian texts used the creature as a warning about how evil could present itself as sanctuary, safety, or even divine blessing, while maintaining predatory intentions that would be revealed only when victims had committed themselves beyond the possibility of escape. The dangerous ocean's capacity to generate Aspidoshalon-like phenomena may be increasing in modern times, as climate change and oceanic shifts create new forms of geographical instability. Reports of islands that appear on satellite imagery but cannot be located by navigation teams, landmasses that seem to shift position over time, and underwater formations that periodically surface before disappearing again, all suggest that some aspects of the ancient legend may represent ongoing oceanic processes. Naval historians studying patterns of maritime settlement disasters have identified cases where entire communities established on apparently stable islands have vanished without trace, leaving no evidence of their existence except for occasional artifacts that wash ashore decades later. These incidents often occur in areas where oceanographic conditions could theoretically support large-scale biological or geological deceptions that might persist for extended periods. The creature's influence on medieval exploration psychology extended far beyond immediate encounters to shape how European cultures approached the discovery and settlement of new lands. The possibility that any newly discovered island might be an Aspidoshaloni in disguise created exploration protocols that emphasized caution, verification, and the kind of long-term observation that could detect signs of biological rather than geological foundation. Modern environmental monitoring systems increasingly incorporate principles that echo medieval approaches to detecting Aspidoshalon-type deceptions. Satellite surveillance that tracks changes in island positions over time, geological surveys that can distinguish between biological and mineral formations, and long-term studies that monitor ecosystem development patterns all represent sophisticated versions of the verification techniques that medieval mariners developed to avoid being deceived by living islands. The creature's patient methodology serves as a metaphor for how the dangerous ocean can weaponize human hope and the desire for new beginnings. The Aspidoshaloni's islands represented everything that maritime explorers sought: new lands for settlement, abundant resources, and escape from the constraints of established territories. By providing exactly what humans most desired, the creature ensured that victims would commit themselves so completely that retreat would become psychologically as well as practically impossible. What emerges from studying the Aspidoshalon across centuries of maritime culture is an understanding of the dangerous ocean as a realm where even the most basic assumptions about physical reality, the solidity of ground, the permanence of land, the reliability of geographic features, can become weapons in the hands of sufficiently patient and intelligent predators. The creature represents not just physical threat but philosophical challenge, a reminder that some mythical sea creatures embody forms of deception so sophisticated that they can operate across geological timescales to transform human virtues like hope, trust, and community building into perfectly orchestrated instruments of destruction. The next time you set foot on unfamiliar land surrounded by water, remember that the dangerous ocean has always harbored predators whose greatest strength lies not in their ability to destroy what humans have built, but in their willingness to allow human communities to flourish for generations before revealing that the very ground beneath their feet has been alive all along, waiting with infinite patience for the perfect moment to return to the depths and carry entire civilizations into the abyss as offerings to the eternal hunger of the sea. Story 14. Iku Turso, the Eternal Plague, Bearer of Baltic Waters. From the patient deception of living islands, we now plunge into the frigid waters of the Baltic Sea, where Finnish mythology birthed one of the most biologically terrifying examples of the dangerous ocean's capacity to weaponize disease itself. This is the story of Iku Turso, the Eternal Turso, a creature whose very existence transforms the concept of marine predation from simple physical violence into systematic biological warfare that can corrupt entire civilizations through supernatural pestilence. Iku Turso represents the dangerous ocean's mastery of invisible threat, creating a predator whose most devastating attacks occur through mechanisms that victims cannot see, smell, or directly combat. Unlike other mythical sea creatures that announce their presence through obvious displays of power, Iku Turso spreads its influence through contamination that can affect victims months or even years after initial exposure, making it impossible to identify the source of destruction until entire communities have been compromised. The Kalevala, Finland's national epic, describes Iku Turso as a horned, octopus-like entity whose tentacles can crush ships and whose presence foretells disaster. But these physical capabilities pale in comparison to its reputation as the father of sickness. The creature doesn't just kill individuals, it corrupts the very essence of life itself, transforming healthy communities into diseased wastelands where survival becomes a prolonged exercise in watching everything you love slowly deteriorate. What makes Iku Turso uniquely terrifying is its dual nature as both active predator and passive plague source. The creature can attack ships directly through conventional maritime monster tactics, crushing vessels with massive tentacles, creating whirlpools to drag down entire fleets, or emerging from the depths to physically destroy coastal settlements. But its most insidious threat comes from simply existing in proximity to human activity, as its presence somehow corrupts the fundamental life processes that support terrestrial existence. The dangerous ocean secrets surrounding Iku Turso extend beyond individual encounters to represent the sea's capacity to serve as an incubator for forces that operate through biological rather than supernatural mechanisms. Finnish folklore suggests that the creature's influence spreads through water contamination, suggesting ancient understanding of how aquatic systems can become vectors for diseases that affect entire populations through mechanisms that transcend normal pathogen transmission. Archaeological evidence from Baltic coastal sites reveals defensive structures and cultural practices that emphasize isolation and purification rather than direct confrontation with marine threats. Elaborate quarantine facilities positioned between coastal areas and inland settlements, ritual purification sites designed for treating individuals who had been exposed to oceanic contamination, and community organizations that could function during extended periods of external threat, all suggest that Finnish cultures prepared systematically for biological warfare waged by oceanic entities. The creature's association with horns adds a supernatural dimension that connects it to ancient European traditions of demonic manifestation, suggesting that Iku Turso represents not just biological threat, but spiritual corruption that can affect the metaphysical foundation of human communities. This dual contamination, physical and spiritual, creates a form of total warfare that attacks victims on every level of existence simultaneously. Modern epidemiological research has identified phenomena that echo ancient descriptions of Iku Turso's influence with disturbing accuracy. Studies of how marine environments can harbor and transmit novel pathogens, the ways that oceanic circulation patterns can spread contamination across vast geographic areas, and the documented cases of marine origin diseases that affect terrestrial populations, all demonstrate that the dangerous ocean possesses exactly the kind of biological weaponization capabilities attributed to the Eternal Turso. Perhaps most unsettling is how Iku Turso's mythological role as a plague bearer parallels contemporary concerns about oceanic systems serving as reservoirs for emerging diseases that could threaten global human populations. Climate change, oceanic pollution, and altered marine ecosystems have created conditions that could theoretically support the evolution or migration of pathogens capable of affecting terrestrial life in ways that mirror ancient descriptions of supernatural pestilence. The creature's tentacled form connects it to real marine organisms, giant squids, massive octopuses, and other cephalopods, whose intelligence and adaptability have been demonstrated through modern marine biology research. This biological foundation suggests that encounters with extremely large, intelligent marine cephalopods might have provided the observational basis for legends that were then expanded through mythological frameworks to encompass supernatural capabilities. The Kalevala's description of the hero Wainamoinen banishing Iku Turso provides a mythological template for dealing with threats that cannot be defeated through conventional means but might be contained or redirected through spiritual and magical intervention. This approach acknowledges that some dangerous ocean entities represent forces too fundamental to be destroyed, requiring instead complex negotiations and containment strategies that operate through supernatural rather than physical mechanisms. Religious practices throughout Finland incorporated Iku Turso-specific rituals designed to detect early signs of the creature's influence and to maintain spiritual defenses against contamination that operated through both biological and supernatural vectors. These ceremonies weren't attempts to combat the creature directly, but rather comprehensive community health measures that acknowledge the interconnection between physical and spiritual contamination. The dangerous ocean's capacity to generate Iku Turso-like phenomena appears to be increasing in modern times as industrial pollution, climate change, and ecosystem disruption create conditions that favor the emergence of novel pathogens with characteristics that echo ancient descriptions of supernatural pestilence. Marine dead zones, toxic algae blooms, and altered ocean chemistry all represent environmental changes that could theoretically support biological threats operating through mechanisms similar to those attributed to the Eternal Turso. Naval historians studying patterns of maritime health incidents have identified cases where ships operating in Baltic waters report crew illnesses that don't match any known disease patterns, often accompanied by equipment failures and navigational anomalies that suggest encounters with large, intelligent marine organisms. These incidents frequently occur in areas where historical records document traditional Iku Turso activity, suggesting continuity between ancient legends and contemporary phenomena. The creature's influence on Finnish maritime culture extends far beyond immediate health concerns to shape how coastal communities approach the relationship between oceanic activity and terrestrial well-being. Iku Turso represents the dangerous ocean's capacity to wage war against human civilization through biological mechanisms that operate independently of direct physical confrontation, making every interaction with marine environments potentially hazardous. Modern environmental monitoring systems increasingly incorporate principles that echo traditional Finnish approaches to detecting Iku Turso-type contamination. Water quality assessments that can identify novel biological threats, health surveillance systems that track disease patterns associated with marine exposure, and community response protocols that can implement quarantine measures during oceanic biological emergencies, all represent sophisticated versions of the defensive strategies that Finnish cultures developed to survive in proximity to the Eternal Turso. The creature's perpetual nature, its designation as eternal, suggests that unlike other mythical sea creatures that might be defeated or appeased, Iku Turso represents a permanent feature of Baltic marine environments that must be managed rather than eliminated. This eternal presence creates a psychological framework where coastal communities must maintain constant vigilance against threats that could emerge without warning and persist indefinitely. What emerges from studying Iku Turso across centuries of Finnish culture is an understanding of the dangerous ocean as a realm where biological and supernatural forces converge to create threats that operate through contamination, rather than direct violence. The creature represents not just individual menace but systematic warning, a reminder that some mythical sea creatures embody forms of warfare that target the fundamental life processes supporting human existence. The next time you notice unexplained illness patterns in coastal communities, or encounter marine environments that seem somehow corrupted despite appearing physically normal, remember that the dangerous ocean has always harbored entities whose greatest weapon is their ability to transform the very essence of life into a vector for destruction. Creatures whose eternal presence ensures that every generation must learn anew how to recognize and defend against threats that operate through mechanisms so subtle and persistent that they can destroy entire civilizations while remaining invisible until the moment when resistance becomes impossible. Story 15. Ningen, the Antarctic humanoids that challenge reality. From the ancient plagues of the Baltic depths, we now venture to the frozen waters of Antarctica, where the dangerous ocean has given birth to one of the most psychologically disturbing modern myths. Creatures whose existence challenges our fundamental understanding of what constitutes human versus inhuman life. This is the story of the Ningen, pale humanoid entities whose massive size and eerily familiar yet completely alien appearance create encounters that transcend simple fear to induce existential crisis about the nature of consciousness, intelligence, and what it means to be human in a universe that may harbor forms of life uncomfortably similar to our own. The Ningen represents the dangerous ocean's capacity to generate contemporary mysteries that operate through uncanny valley psychology rather than traditional monster terror. These creatures, first reported by Japanese fishing vessels in the late 20th century, embody the modern fear that the ocean's unexplored depths may contain intelligence that parallels human consciousness, while operating according to principles so alien that communication becomes impossible and coexistence unthinkable. Unlike ancient mythical sea creatures that clearly belong to supernatural or fantastical categories, the Ningen occupies the disturbing middle ground between cryptozoological possibility and psychological projection. Witnesses describe beings up to 30 meters in length, with distinctly human-like torsos, arms, and heads, yet lacking clearly defined facial features, creating the impression of enormous humans whose identity has been somehow erased or never properly developed. What makes the Ningen uniquely terrifying among modern maritime mysteries is its apparent intelligence, combined with complete inability or unwillingness to communicate with human observers. Unlike other mysterious marine encounters where witnesses report aggressive behavior, territorial displays, or obvious predatory intent, Ningen sightings typically describe creatures that simply observe human vessels with what appears to be curiosity or assessment, creating psychological tension through their very presence, rather than any specific threatening action. The dangerous ocean secrets surrounding the Ningen extend beyond individual sightings to represent contemporary fears about what unknown intelligence might be developing in Earth's most isolated and inaccessible environments. Antarctica's waters, largely unexplored due to extreme conditions and international treaty restrictions, provide exactly the kind of environment where evolution could theoretically produce forms of life that parallel human development, while remaining completely separate from terrestrial biological history. Modern marine biology has documented the existence of highly intelligent marine organisms, particularly cephalopods, whose cognitive capabilities approach or exceed human levels in specific areas, yet whose consciousness operates according to principles so different from mammalian psychology that meaningful communication remains impossible. The Ningen may represent the logical extension of such evolutionary pathways, developing humanoid characteristics while maintaining fundamentally alien cognitive frameworks. Perhaps most disturbing is how Ningen encounters consistently occur in areas where human presence is minimal and where verification of sightings becomes practically impossible. Antarctic waters, far from shipping lanes and populated areas, create perfect conditions for encounters that can be reported but never confirmed, leaving witnesses with experiences that challenge their understanding of reality, while providing no objective evidence that could validate or refute their observations. The creature's pale, almost translucent appearance connects it to the extreme environment of polar waters, suggesting adaptation to conditions where normal pigmentation would be unnecessary or counterproductive. This biological realism embedded within the mysterious encounters suggests that if Ningen do exist, they represent genuine evolutionary responses to Antarctic conditions, rather than supernatural manifestations. Fishing industry reports describe Ningen surfacing near vessels, with movements that appear deliberately coordinated and purposeful, yet without any apparent interest in the human activities taking place above them. This combination of obvious intelligence with apparent indifference to human presence creates encounters that are deeply unsettling, precisely because they suggest that humans may not be as significant or interesting to other forms of consciousness as we typically assume. The dangerous ocean's capacity to generate Ningen-like phenomena may be increasing as climate change alters Antarctic ecosystems and brings human activity into previously inaccessible polar regions. Ice shelf collapses, changing current patterns, and altered marine food chains could theoretically force deepwater species to the surface more frequently, creating conditions where encounters with unknown large marine organisms become more likely. Modern oceanographic research in Antarctic waters has documented the existence of previously unknown ecosystems beneath ice shelves, massive underwater cave systems that could harbor large organisms, and deep water currents that connect Antarctic regions to global oceanic circulation patterns. These discoveries suggest that the Southern Ocean contains exactly the kind of isolated yet connected environments where unknown species could develop, while remaining hidden from human observation. Naval historians studying patterns of unexplained sonar contacts in polar waters have identified recurring signatures that suggest large, intelligent marine organisms moving in coordinated patterns through deep Antarctic waters. These contacts often appear on multiple detection systems simultaneously, eliminating equipment malfunction as an explanation, yet they disappear before surface confirmation becomes possible. The creature's humanoid characteristics serve as a disturbing reminder that evolution might produce intelligence and consciousness through pathways that parallel human development, while remaining fundamentally alien to human experience. The Ningen represents the possibility that the dangerous ocean harbors minds that think in ways recognizably similar to human thought processes, yet operate according to values and purposes that make meaningful interaction impossible. Modern psychological research has identified the uncanny valley effect, where human-like entities that aren't quite human trigger profound psychological discomfort and existential uncertainty. Ningen encounters exploit this psychological vulnerability perfectly, presenting witnesses with beings that appear familiar enough to suggest kinship, yet alien enough to challenge basic assumptions about what constitutes human versus non-human consciousness. The creature's association with modern Japanese maritime culture reflects contemporary anxiety about technological civilization's relationship with natural systems that remain largely unknown. Despite centuries of scientific investigation, the Ningen embodies fears that human technological advancement may be discovering rather than creating the future, revealing that forms of intelligence we consider uniquely human may already exist in environments we've barely begun to explore. Religious and philosophical implications of Ningen encounters extend far beyond maritime mystery into fundamental questions about consciousness, identity, and humanity's place in the cosmic order. If such beings exist, they suggest that human-like intelligence may be a common evolutionary outcome rather than a unique terrestrial achievement, potentially requiring complete reconceptualization of our understanding of life, consciousness, and cosmic significance. Modern shipping protocols in Antarctic waters increasingly include contingency procedures for encounters with unknown large marine organisms, acknowledging that polar ecosystems may harbor species whose size, intelligence, and behavior patterns don't match conventional biological models. These protocols emphasize observation and documentation, rather than contact attempts, recognizing that encounters with truly alien intelligence might require entirely new frameworks for interaction. The creature's apparent lack of aggression or obvious threat behavior creates a form of terror that operates through philosophical rather than physical mechanisms. Ningen encounters force witnesses to confront the possibility that the dangerous ocean contains conscious entities whose relationship to human existence is characterized not by hostility or benevolence, but by complete indifference, a psychological challenge that may be more disturbing than direct threats. What emerges from studying the Ningen across decades of modern maritime culture is an understanding of the dangerous ocean as a realm where the boundary between scientific possibility and psychological projection becomes meaningless in ways that challenge fundamental assumptions about knowledge, reality, and human uniqueness. The creatures represent not just individual mystery but epistemological warning, a reminder that some mythical sea creatures may embody forms of consciousness so alien, yet familiar, that encounters with them force complete reconsideration of what it means to be human in a universe that may harbor intelligence in forms we're not prepared to recognize or understand. The next time you find yourself in truly isolated waters, far from the comfort of human civilization and technological support, remember that the dangerous ocean's most terrifying secrets may not be monsters that threaten human life, but minds that operate according to principles so similar yet so alien to human consciousness that successful contact becomes impossible, leaving us alone with the knowledge that we may not be as unique, as significant, or as alone as we've always believed ourselves to be. Story 16. Dagon, the ancient god who rules from beneath. From the modern enigma of Antarctic humanoids, we now descend into the deepest layers of human religious consciousness, where the dangerous ocean reveals its most fundamental truth: that beneath the waves dwells not merely monsters or mysterious creatures, but actual deities whose power over maritime domains predates human civilization itself. This is the story of Dagon, the half-man, half-fish god whose dominion over storms, fertility, and the very foundations of oceanic power demonstrates that some mythical sea creatures transcend the category of creature entirely to become cosmic forces that shape reality according to divine will. Dagon represents the dangerous ocean's ultimate expression of divine authority, creating a being whose very existence challenges human assumptions about the relationship between natural forces and supernatural consciousness. Unlike other sea deities who might be appeased through proper ritual or avoided through careful navigation, Dagon embodies the ocean's capacity to operate as a conscious entity whose decisions determine the fate of entire civilizations without regard for human prayers, offerings, or diplomatic negotiations. Ancient Philistine and Mesopotamian texts describe Dagon not as a creature dwelling within the sea, but as the sea's conscious will made manifest in humanoid form, a being whose upper body possesses human intelligence and communication capabilities, while his lower body remains permanently connected to the oceanic forces that regulate global climate, weather patterns, and the fundamental conditions supporting all terrestrial life. This dual nature makes Dagon simultaneously accessible to human interaction and utterly beyond human control. What makes Dagon uniquely terrifying among maritime deities is his role as both creator and destroyer of the conditions that support human civilization. Ancient worship practices acknowledged that the god's favor could bring abundant fishing, favorable weather for maritime trade, and the kind of oceanic stability that allows coastal communities to thrive. Yet the same divine power could unleash storms capable of destroying entire fleets, alter current patterns to devastate regional economies, and generate oceanic conditions that make human survival impossible across vast geographic areas. The dangerous ocean secrets surrounding Dagon extend beyond individual divine encounters to represent the sea's capacity to operate according to consciousness and intention, rather than simple natural law. Archaeological evidence from Philistine coastal cities reveals temples and ceremonial complexes designed for direct communication with oceanic intelligence, suggesting that ancient cultures considered the sea's behavior to be the result of divine decision-making rather than impersonal physical processes. Biblical accounts of Dagon's temples, particularly the dramatic collapse described in the Book of Samuel when the Ark of the Covenant was placed in his sanctuary, provide mythological frameworks for understanding how different divine authorities might compete for influence over maritime domains. These conflicts suggest that oceanic power operates through complex supernatural hierarchies, where various divine entities maintain jurisdiction over different aspects of marine environments and human maritime activities. Modern oceanographic research has revealed phenomena that echo ancient descriptions of Dagon's influence with unsettling accuracy. Global oceanic circulation patterns that seem to operate according to purposeful intelligence, weather systems that appear to respond to human activity through coordinated, rather than random mechanisms, and marine ecosystem behaviors that suggest coordination across vast geographic areas, all demonstrate that the dangerous ocean operates through principles that could easily be interpreted as divine consciousness, rather than purely physical forces. Perhaps most disturbing is how Dagon's mythological role as a storm deity parallels contemporary understanding of how oceanic systems generate and control the weather patterns that determine agricultural success, economic stability, and the basic conditions supporting human civilization. Climate science has confirmed that oceanic behavior functions as the primary regulatory mechanism for global environmental conditions, giving the seas exactly the kind of godlike power over human fate that ancient cultures attributed to Dagon. The creature's fish-like lower body connects him to the evolutionary history that links all terrestrial life to oceanic origins, suggesting that Dagon represents not just divine authority over the seas, but the ocean's role as the fundamental source from which all life emerges and to which all life must ultimately return. This biological foundation transforms the deity from external supernatural force into the conscious expression of humanity's deepest evolutionary memories. H.P. Lovecraft's modern reinterpretation of Dagon as a cosmic horror entity reflects contemporary fears about oceanic intelligence operating on scales beyond human comprehension or control. Lovecraft's version emphasizes the god's alien nature and his complete indifference to human survival, creating a mythological framework that acknowledges oceanic consciousness while denying any possibility of meaningful communication or negotiation with that consciousness. Religious practices throughout the ancient Near East incorporated Dagon-specific rituals designed to maintain favorable relationships with oceanic divine authority, while acknowledging the fundamental impossibility of controlling or commanding such power. These ceremonies weren't attempts to manipulate divine will, but rather sophisticated diplomatic protocols for interacting with consciousness that operated according to principles beyond human understanding, yet whose decisions determined human survival. The dangerous ocean's capacity to generate Dagon-like phenomena appears to be intensifying in modern times as human activity increasingly affects global oceanic systems that respond in ways suggesting coordinated rather than purely mechanical reactions. Climate change effects, oceanic pollution responses, and ecosystem alterations that seem to follow patterns resembling conscious decision-making all indicate that the seas may indeed operate through forms of intelligence that transcend conventional biological categories. Naval historians studying patterns of maritime disasters and favorable conditions have identified correlations between human behavior toward oceanic environments and subsequent oceanic responses that suggest cause and effect, relationships operating through mechanisms more complex than simple environmental degradation and recovery. These patterns imply that the dangerous ocean may indeed respond to human actions according to principles that resemble divine judgment rather than purely physical causation. The creature's association with fertility connects oceanic divine power to the fundamental biological processes that support all terrestrial life, suggesting that Dagon's influence extends far beyond maritime context to encompass agriculture, human reproduction, and the basic cycles of creation and destruction that regulate life on Earth. This comprehensive authority makes the deity relevant to every aspect of human existence, rather than just maritime activities. Modern environmental management increasingly acknowledges that oceanic systems operate through feedback mechanisms and emergent properties that suggest forms of intelligence or consciousness that transcend simple mechanical models. Climate scientists now recognize that the world's oceans exhibit behaviors and response patterns that could theoretically be interpreted as evidence of planetary-scale consciousness operating through oceanic mechanisms. The creature's temple-based worship provides a mythological framework for understanding how human civilizations might establish and maintain diplomatic relationships with oceanic consciousness that operates according to divine rather than natural principles. Ancient ceremonial practices suggest that successful interaction with oceanic intelligence requires acknowledgement of its divine status, rather than attempts to control or exploit its power. What emerges from studying Dagon across millennia of human religious experience is an understanding of the dangerous ocean as a realm where divine consciousness and natural force converge in ways that challenge fundamental assumptions about the relationship between spiritual and physical reality. The deity represents not just individual divine encounter, but cosmic warning. A reminder that some mythical sea creatures embody forms of consciousness so fundamental to the structure of reality that they operate as gods whose authority extends far beyond oceanic domains to encompass the basic conditions supporting existence itself. The next time you witness the ocean's power to generate storms, regulate climate, or support the biological processes that sustain all terrestrial life, remember that ancient wisdom recognized these forces as evidence of divine consciousness operating through oceanic mechanisms. A god whose authority over the dangerous ocean reflects cosmic responsibilities that make human concerns seem like temporary ripples on an infinite sea of divine purpose that predates human civilization and will continue long after human extinction becomes just another minor adjustment in the eternal cycles of oceanic consciousness. Story 17. The Flying Dutchman, the eternal ship of cursed souls. From the divine consciousness of oceanic gods, we now encounter one of the dangerous ocean's most psychologically devastating weapons, a vessel that transforms the very concept of maritime travel, from temporary journey into eternal damnation. This is the story of the Flying Dutchman, a ghost ship whose existence proves that some mythical sea creatures aren't born from the depths. They're created through the ocean's capacity to preserve and weaponize human hubris, transforming proud vessels and their crews into supernatural harbingers that spread despair across every sea they eternally sail. The Flying Dutchman represents the dangerous ocean's mastery of psychological warfare through the corruption of hope itself. Unlike other supernatural maritime threats that attack through obvious aggression or deception, this phantom vessel operates by appearing to offer exactly what storm-battered sailors most desperately need: proof that survival is possible, evidence that other ships can navigate the same treacherous waters, and the promise of assistance from fellow mariners who understand the perils of oceanic travel. Yet every aspect of this apparent salvation serves to intensify rather than relieve the psychological pressure on witnesses. The ship appears during the worst possible conditions: violent storms, supernatural fogs, or the kind of dangerous ocean environments where normal vessels should be seeking shelter rather than maintaining course. Its presence suggests that its crew either possesses supernatural protection or has abandoned all concern for survival, both possibilities that force witnesses to confront deeply disturbing questions about the nature of maritime existence. European maritime folklore traces the Dutchman's origin to Captain van der Decken, whose determination to round the Cape of Good Hope during a violent storm led him to curse God and declare his willingness to sail forever rather than submit to divine will. This act of ultimate hubris transformed his vessel from a tool of human ambition into an instrument of oceanic justice, demonstrating the dangerous ocean's capacity to preserve human consciousness within supernatural punishment frameworks that ensure appropriate consequences for cosmic transgressions. What makes the Flying Dutchman uniquely terrifying among maritime supernatural phenomena is its role as both warning and curse delivery system. Sailors who sight the phantom vessel don't simply witness supernatural manifestation, they become infected with knowledge of their own maritime fate. The ship's appearance serves as prophecy of impending disaster, yet attempts to avoid that disaster often trigger the very catastrophes that the sighting predicted, creating causal loops where supernatural warning becomes supernatural weapon. The dangerous ocean secrets surrounding the Flying Dutchman extend beyond individual encounters to represent the sea's capacity to transform human technology into agents of cosmic justice that operate according to supernatural rather than natural principles. The ship maintains all the characteristics of normal maritime vessels: sails, rigging, hull design, crew positions, yet operates according to physics that violate basic assumptions about wind, current, and the material limitations that constrain ordinary ships. Archaeological evidence from European coastal communities reveals defensive and observational practices specifically designed to detect and respond to phantom vessel encounters. Lighthouse systems that incorporated supernatural warning protocols, harbor defenses oriented toward detecting spectral rather than physical ship threats, and maritime legal frameworks that acknowledged supernatural encounters as legitimate justification for navigation decisions, all suggest that phantom ship sightings were considered regular rather than exceptional aspects of oceanic travel. The ship's luminous appearance, often described as glowing with eerie phosphorescent light that seems to emanate from the vessel itself rather than external sources, connects it to real oceanic phenomena like bioluminescence and electrical atmospheric effects that can create exactly the kind of supernatural lighting conditions described in Dutchman encounters. This biological and physical foundation suggests that some phantom ship sightings might represent real vessels operating under unusual environmental conditions that create supernatural appearances. Modern maritime technology has documented phenomena that echo traditional Flying Dutchman descriptions with unsettling consistency. Radar contacts that appear to show vessels moving at impossible speeds or in directions contrary to wind and current patterns. Sonar signatures that suggest ship-like objects operating in areas where no vessels should be present, and electromagnetic anomalies that coincide with visual sightings of unidentified maritime craft, all demonstrate that the dangerous ocean continues to generate experiences that parallel ancient supernatural encounters. Perhaps most disturbing is how the Flying Dutchman's eternal voyage serves as a metaphor for the psychological state of maritime professionals who spend their entire lives traveling oceanic routes without ever truly arriving anywhere, permanent or final. The phantom ship represents the ultimate extension of maritime existence, a vessel whose crew has become so completely adapted to oceanic life that they've lost the ability to return to terrestrial existence, even in death. The creature's association with Wagner's opera and subsequent cultural adaptations reflects the Dutchman legend's capacity to represent broader themes about redemption, curse-breaking, and the possibility of escape from supernatural punishment through human love or divine intervention. These romantic interpretations acknowledge the fundamentally tragic nature of the phantom vessel, while suggesting that even oceanic curses might be subject to resolution through appropriate emotional or spiritual mechanisms. Religious practices throughout maritime Europe incorporated Flying Dutchman-specific rituals designed to protect crews from curse transmission and to establish proper responses to phantom vessel encounters. These ceremonies weren't attempts to avoid supernatural ships, but rather protocols for minimizing the psychological and spiritual damage that could result from exposure to vessels operating under divine punishment. Sailors learned specific prayers, carried protective amulets, and maintained behavioral codes designed to prevent their own vessels from becoming similarly cursed. The dangerous ocean's capacity to generate Flying Dutchman-like phenomena appears to be influenced by maritime disasters and cosmic justice themes that create conditions where phantom vessel sightings become more frequent during periods of increased oceanic travel or environmental stress. Modern shipping lanes report unexplained radar contacts and visual anomalies that increase during severe weather events, suggesting that dangerous ocean conditions continue to trigger supernatural manifestations that echo traditional ghost ship encounters. Naval historians studying patterns of phantom vessel reports have identified correlations between Flying Dutchman sightings and subsequent maritime disasters that suggest either genuine prophetic capabilities or psychological mechanisms that transform supernatural encounters into self-fulfilling prophecies. Crews that report Dutchman encounters frequently experience navigation errors, equipment failures, or decision-making problems that lead to exactly the kind of disasters that the phantom ship's appearance traditionally predicted. The creature's influence on maritime psychology extends far beyond immediate encounters to shape how sailors understand the relationship between human ambition and cosmic authority. The Flying Dutchman represents the possibility that excessive pride in human technological capabilities or insufficient respect for oceanic power can result in punishments that transcend individual lifetime to become eternal, supernatural conditions affecting entire vessels and crews. Modern environmental monitoring systems increasingly detect shipping anomalies and unexplained vessel behaviors that parallel traditional descriptions of phantom ship activity. Automated tracking systems record courses and speeds that seem to violate physical laws, while satellite surveillance occasionally captures images of vessels in locations where no ships should be present, according to official maritime traffic records. The ship's eternal nature, its designation as forever sailing without possibility of rest or final destination, provides a mythological framework for understanding how certain forms of oceanic punishment might operate according to cosmic rather than temporal principles. This eternal voyage concept suggests that the dangerous ocean contains forces capable of preserving human consciousness within supernatural frameworks that ensure appropriate consequences persist across indefinite time periods. What emerges from studying the Flying Dutchman across centuries of maritime culture is an understanding of the dangerous ocean as a realm where human technology and cosmic justice converge to create supernatural phenomena that operate as both warning systems and punishment mechanisms. The phantom vessel represents not just individual supernatural encounter, but cosmic enforcement, a reminder that some mythical sea creatures embody the ocean's capacity to transform human achievements into instruments of divine justice that ensure maritime hubris receives appropriate supernatural consequences. The next time you sight an unfamiliar vessel during dangerous ocean conditions, particularly one that seems to be navigating successfully through weather that should make sailing impossible, remember that such encounters may represent not rescue opportunities, but glimpses of the eternal punishment that awaits those who challenge cosmic authority. A phantom ship whose crew has learned too late that some prices for maritime pride must be paid through voyages that continue long after death, sailing forever across dangerous waters that never lead to any destination except deeper understanding of how thoroughly the ocean can transform human ambition into eternal supernatural servitude. Story 18. Rusalka, the drowned spirits who transform love into death. From the eternal voyage of cursed vessels, we now wade into the murky waters, where the dangerous ocean meets rivers and lakes, creating environments where Slavic mythology births some of the most psychologically complex predators ever conceived. These are beings whose hunting strategies operate through the weaponization of love, beauty, and the deepest human desires for connection and redemption. This is the story of the Rusalka, water spirits whose ethereal beauty disguises a supernatural intelligence, dedicated to transforming romance into drowning, seduction into death, and the promise of love into the reality of joining an ever-growing community of the vengefully drowned. The Rusalka represents the dangerous ocean's mastery of emotional manipulation, creating predators whose greatest weapons are precisely those qualities that humans find most attractive and emotionally compelling. Unlike other mythical sea creatures that threaten through obvious supernatural power or physical force, Rusalka hunt by becoming exactly what their victims most desire. They appear as beautiful, available, emotionally responsive women whose apparent vulnerability triggers protective instincts that lead potential lovers directly into fatal encounters. Slavic folklore describes these water spirits as the restless souls of women who died through drowning, suicide, or violence related to failed romances. This creates a supernatural ecosystem where victims of emotional trauma become predators, who perpetuate the cycle by claiming new victims through identical emotional vulnerabilities. This transformation from victim to predator suggests that the dangerous ocean possesses the capacity to preserve and redirect human emotional energy in ways that transcend death to become eternal hunting mechanisms. What makes the Rusalka uniquely terrifying among water spirits is their sophisticated understanding of male psychology and their ability to customize their approach for each individual victim's specific emotional weaknesses. They don't simply appear as generically beautiful women, but rather manifest as precisely the type of female companion that each potential victim has been seeking. Whether that's a passionate lover, a gentle caretaker, a mysterious adventure partner, or a spiritual guide who offers transcendent connection, the creature's pale, wet appearance serves multiple psychological functions that enhance their predatory effectiveness. The pallor suggests fragility and otherworldliness that triggers protective instincts, while the constantly wet condition creates an aura of having recently emerged from water. This implies both vulnerability and connection to aquatic environments that will eventually become the victim's final resting place. This visual presentation perfectly balances attraction with subtle warnings that victims typically ignore until too late. Archaeological evidence from Slavic river valleys and coastal regions reveals defensive structures and cultural practices specifically designed to protect young men from Rusalka encounters. Riverside settlements with architectural features that restrict access to water during certain times, ritual schedules that coordinate community activities to avoid individual exposure to aquatic environments, and marriage customs that emphasize rapid courtship to prevent emotional vulnerability to supernatural alternatives all suggest that Rusalka threats were considered real and immediate rather than merely cautionary tales. The dangerous ocean secrets surrounding Rusalka extend beyond individual predation to represent aquatic environments' capacity to preserve and transform human emotional energy into supernatural forces that operate according to psychological rather than biological imperatives. The spirit's hunting methods demonstrate understanding of human emotional development, relationship psychology, and the specific vulnerabilities that make individuals susceptible to romantic manipulation. Modern psychological research has identified phenomena that echo ancient descriptions of Rusalka encounters with disturbing accuracy. Studies of how emotional trauma can create predatory behaviors, the psychology of individuals who use romantic attraction as a weapon, and the ways that certain personality types become compulsively drawn to relationships that recreate past emotional damage, all demonstrate that human psychology contains vulnerabilities that could theoretically be exploited by entities capable of presenting perfectly targeted romantic scenarios. Perhaps most unsettling is how Rusalka mythology anticipates contemporary understanding of how emotional manipulation can operate through romantic contexts to create situations where victims voluntarily participate in their own destruction. The spirit's success depends not on forcing victims into dangerous situations, but on making those situations appear to be exactly what the victims want most. This creates psychological frameworks where resistance becomes impossible without rejecting their own deepest desires. The creature's association with specific seasonal timing, particularly spring rituals when they were believed to be most active, connects their hunting cycles to natural patterns of human emotional and sexual awakening that occur during periods of environmental renewal and increased social activity. This seasonal pattern suggests that Rusalka predation operates through exploitation of natural psychological rhythms that make certain times of year particularly dangerous for encounters with supernatural romantic threats. Eastern European religious practices incorporated Rusalka-specific rituals designed to protect community members from supernatural romantic encounters, while acknowledging the spirit's territorial rights and emotional legitimacy. These ceremonies weren't attempts to destroy or banish the water spirits, but rather complex diplomatic protocols that recognized their tragic origins, while establishing boundaries that protected the living from joining their supernatural community. The dangerous ocean's capacity to generate Rusalka-like phenomena may be increasing in modern times as social isolation, digital communication, and altered relationship patterns create psychological conditions that make individuals more vulnerable to romantic manipulation by entities that could exploit contemporary emotional weaknesses. Online dating, social media relationships, and virtual romantic connections all create new contexts where Rusalka-type predation could operate through technological rather than direct physical encounters. Naval historians and anthropologists studying patterns of drowning incidents in traditional Rusalka territories have identified cases where experienced swimmers die in circumstances that suggest voluntary rather than accidental submersion. These incidents often occur in locations associated with romantic meetings or emotional significance. These incidents frequently involve individuals who had been exhibiting unusual behavior patterns, consistent with romantic obsession or emotional manipulation by unknown partners. The creature's influence on Slavic romantic culture extends far beyond immediate supernatural threats to shape how communities understand the relationship between emotional vulnerability and physical danger in aquatic environments. Rusalka represent the possibility that intense romantic experiences can literally transport individuals into supernatural realms where normal survival instincts become irrelevant compared to emotional fulfillment that promises transcendent union through death. Modern environmental psychology increasingly acknowledges that certain natural environments can trigger emotional states that make individuals more susceptible to risk-taking behaviors, poor decision-making, and the kind of romantic impulsivity that Rusalka mythology warns against. Waterside locations, particularly those with historical significance or dramatic natural beauty, continue to be associated with romantic encounters that sometimes result in unexplained accidents or disappearances. The spirit's communal nature, their tendency to hunt in groups and to welcome new victims into their supernatural sisterhood, provides a mythological framework for understanding how emotional trauma can create social groups that perpetuate destructive relationship patterns across multiple generations. The Rusalka community represents the ultimate expression of how romantic damage can become self-perpetuating through supernatural mechanisms that ensure each victim becomes a predator seeking new victims. Dvorak's opera Rusalka and other cultural adaptations reflect the mythology's capacity to represent broader themes about love, sacrifice, and the possibility of redemption through romantic devotion that transcends death itself. These artistic interpretations acknowledge the fundamentally tragic nature of the spirits, while exploring whether genuine love might offer escape routes from supernatural predation cycles that operate through romantic manipulation. What emerges from studying Rusalka across centuries of Slavic culture is an understanding of the dangerous ocean as a realm where human emotional energy can be preserved and weaponized through supernatural mechanisms that operate according to psychological rather than physical principles. The spirits represent not just individual romantic threat but emotional warning, a reminder that some mythical sea creatures embody forms of predation that exploit humanity's deepest needs for love, connection, and emotional fulfillment. The next time you encounter an unusually beautiful stranger near water, particularly someone whose appearance and personality seem perfectly designed to fulfill your specific romantic fantasies, remember that the dangerous ocean has always harbored spirits, whose greatest power lies in their ability to become exactly what you think you want most. These are creatures whose supernatural beauty conceals eternal hunger for companions, who will join them in underwater realms where love and death become indistinguishable, and where every romantic encounter leads deeper into aquatic embrace that promises emotional fulfillment, but delivers only the company of other victims who discovered too late that some forms of love are designed to drown rather than rescue the human heart. Story 19. Kalupalik, the Arctic Child, Thieves of Frozen Waters. From the romantic predators of temperate waters, we now journey to the frigid Arctic seas, where Inuit mythology has preserved one of the most psychologically disturbing examples of the dangerous ocean's capacity to target humanity's most precious and vulnerable members. This is the story of the Kalupalik, creatures whose hunting strategies operate through the weaponization of childhood curiosity and parental trust, transforming the innocent play of children near water into perfectly orchestrated kidnapping operations that serve supernatural purposes beyond human understanding. The Kalupalik represents the dangerous ocean's ultimate violation of the social contracts that protect children, creating predators whose existence challenges the fundamental assumption that adults can guarantee child safety through vigilance and appropriate precautions. These humanoid sea creatures, with their green-tinged skin, long black hair, and fingernails grown into deadly claws, embody every parent's worst nightmare about unknown threats that lurk just beyond the boundaries of secure domestic space. Inuit oral traditions describe the Kalupalik's hunting methods with the kind of specific detail that suggests direct observational experience rather than imaginative storytelling. The creatures emerge from ice-cold Arctic waters during times when children are playing near shorelines, ice edges, or tidal pools, using their distinctive humming songs to attract young victims who find the melodies irresistibly fascinating. This musical lure exploits children's natural curiosity about new sounds and their tendency to investigate interesting phenomena without considering potential dangers. What makes the Kalupalik uniquely terrifying among child-targeting supernatural entities is their methodical approach to victim selection and the sophisticated equipment they carry for kidnapping operations. Each creature possesses an amot, a special pouch or bag designed specifically for carrying stolen children underwater for extended periods without drowning them. This equipment suggests that Kalupalik kidnapping isn't random predation, but rather systematic harvesting of children for purposes that require keeping victims alive during transportation to underwater destinations. The dangerous ocean secrets surrounding Kalupalik extend beyond individual kidnapping incidents to represent the Arctic's capacity to harbor intelligent predators that understand human family structures well enough to exploit the specific vulnerabilities that make children accessible to supernatural threats. The creature's timing, targeting, and methodology all demonstrate sophisticated knowledge of human behavior patterns, child psychology, and the environmental conditions that create opportunities for successful kidnapping operations. Archaeological evidence from Inuit settlements reveals cultural practices and architectural features specifically designed to protect children from Kalupalik encounters. Coastal communities with housing arrangements that minimize unsupervised child access to water, play area designs that provide multiple escape routes and clear sightlines for adult supervision, and educational traditions that emphasize water safety through supernatural rather than purely practical frameworks, all suggest that kalupalic threats were considered immediate and ongoing rather than merely cautionary. The creature's green skin coloration connects them to the unique lighting conditions of Arctic marine environments, where ice, water, and atmospheric effects can create exactly the kind of unusual pigmentation that would provide perfect camouflage for predators operating in polar coastal areas. This biological realism embedded within the supernatural framework suggests that kalupalic encounters might represent interactions with real Arctic marine organisms whose appearance and behavior have been interpreted through mythological frameworks. Modern psychological research has identified phenomena that echo ancient descriptions of kalupalic predation with disturbing consistency. Studies of how predators use audio lures to attract child victims, the psychology of children who become separated from protective adults in hazardous environments, and the ways that certain personality types target children specifically for their vulnerability and malleability, all demonstrate that human child protection instincts face real threats that could theoretically be exploited by entities capable of presenting precisely targeted lures. Perhaps most unsettling is how kalupalic mythology acknowledges that stolen children aren't simply killed but rather transported to underwater realms where they presumably join communities of other kidnapped victims. This suggests that the creature's ultimate purpose involves creating or maintaining underwater societies that require regular recruitment of human children to function properly, a concept that transforms individual kidnapping incidents into evidence of systematic supernatural colonization efforts. The creature's association with specific environmental conditions, particularly the ice edge environments where Arctic waters meet frozen surfaces, positions them as guardians or inhabitants of the boundary zones between terrestrial and aquatic realms. These transition areas, where solid ice gives way to dangerous ocean waters, represent exactly the kind of liminal spaces where supernatural entities traditionally operate most effectively, exploiting the uncertainty and environmental instability that characterize such locations. Inuit cultural practices incorporated kalupalic-specific educational traditions that taught children to recognize and avoid supernatural threats while acknowledging the creature's territorial rights and supernatural legitimacy. These educational frameworks weren't simply scare tactics, but rather sophisticated survival training that prepared children to navigate Arctic environments that contained both natural and supernatural dangers, requiring different types of defensive strategies. The dangerous ocean's capacity to generate kalupalic-like phenomena may be increasing in modern times, as climate change alters Arctic ice patterns and brings human settlements into closer contact with previously inaccessible marine environments. Melting ice, changing current patterns, and altered wildlife behaviors could theoretically create conditions where encounters with unknown Arctic marine organisms become more frequent, particularly in areas where traditional ice barriers no longer provide reliable protection. Naval historians and anthropologists studying patterns of child disappearances in Arctic coastal communities have identified cases where experienced Arctic families lose children in circumstances that suggest intelligent predation rather than simple environmental accidents. These incidents often occur during calm weather conditions when normal Arctic hazards should be minimal, yet involve children who possessed appropriate survival training and environmental awareness. The creature's influence on Inuit child-rearing practices extends far beyond immediate safety concerns to shape how Arctic communities understand the relationship between human domestic space and the supernatural forces that govern marine environments. Kalupalic represent the possibility that the dangerous ocean contains entities whose interest in human children operates according to purposes that transcend simple predation to encompass supernatural social engineering that requires regular recruitment of young humans. Modern environmental monitoring in Arctic regions has documented phenomena that parallel traditional kalupalic descriptions, including unusual sonar contacts that suggest large, intelligent marine organisms operating in coastal areas, unexplained acoustic signatures that resemble the humming songs associated with kalupalic lures, and marine life behaviors that suggest coordination by entities whose intelligence and purposes don't match conventional biological models. The creature's specific targeting of children, reflects sophisticated understanding of human vulnerability patterns and the ways that adult protective systems can be circumvented through exploitation of childhood psychology and curiosity. This suggests that dangerous ocean entities may possess exactly the kind of intelligence necessary to identify and exploit the specific weaknesses that make human communities most vulnerable to supernatural infiltration. Recruitment. Traditional Kalupalik stories often include accounts of children who escape or are rescued from underwater captivity, providing mythological frameworks for understanding how supernatural kidnapping might be survived and what kinds of knowledge such experiences might provide about underwater realms and their inhabitants. These rescue narratives suggest that some aspects of Kalupalik encounters might be reversible through appropriate intervention strategies that operate according to supernatural rather than purely physical principles. What emerges from studying Kalupalik across generations of Inuit oral tradition is an understanding of the dangerous ocean as a realm where supernatural intelligence operates through systematic targeting of human vulnerability, particularly the vulnerabilities that children represent in traditional, survival-oriented societies. The creatures represent not just individual kidnapping threat, but systematic warning, a reminder that some mythical sea creatures embody forms of predation that exploit the most precious aspects of human social organization. The next time you observe children playing near water in isolated environments, particularly in areas where ice and ocean intersect to create the kind of liminal spaces that supernatural entities favor, remember that the dangerous ocean has always harbored creatures whose hunting strategies operate through perfect understanding of childhood psychology and parental vulnerability. These are beings whose supernatural patience and intelligence allow them to transform the innocent curiosity of young humans into perfectly orchestrated kidnapping opportunities that serve purposes beyond human comprehension, carrying stolen children into underwater realms, where their ultimate fate becomes part of mysteries that even the bravest Arctic explorers have never been able to fully investigate or understand. Story 20. Ahuizotl, the divine executioner of sacred waters. From the child-stealing waters of the Arctic, we now descend into the sacred lakes and coastal waters of ancient Mesoamerica, where Aztec mythology preserved one of the most theologically complex examples of the dangerous ocean's capacity to serve as an instrument of divine will. This is the story of the Ahuizotl, a creature whose existence transforms drowning from random tragedy into religious sacrifice, demonstrating that some mythical sea creatures operate not as independent predators, but as agents of cosmic justice, whose hunting activities serve supernatural purposes that transcend human understanding of life, death, and divine authority. The Ahuizotl represents the dangerous ocean's role as executor of divine judgment, creating a predator whose attacks aren't motivated by hunger, territory, or survival instinct, but rather by religious obligation to provide the rain god Talak with appropriate sacrificial offerings. This dog-like water spirit, with its human hand growing from the tip of its tail, embodies the intersection between natural predation and supernatural religious practice, transforming every drowning into a potential act of cosmic worship. Aztec texts describe the Ahuizotl's hunting methods with the kind of ritualistic precision that suggests its predatory behavior operates according to religious protocols rather than simple biological imperatives. The creature uses its hand-tipped tail to grab victims and drag them underwater, but rather than consuming them directly, it delivers the drowned bodies to Tlaloc as offerings that maintain the cosmic balance necessary for continued rainfall and agricultural fertility throughout the Aztec Empire. What makes the Ahuizotl uniquely terrifying among religiously motivated supernatural entities is its ability to mimic human distress calls with perfect accuracy, creating acoustic lures that exploit the natural human impulse to rescue drowning victims. This vocal mimicry transforms altruistic rescue attempts into fatal encounters, ensuring that the creature's sacrificial quotas are filled through the weaponization of human compassion and community responsibility. The dangerous ocean secrets surrounding the Ahuizotl extend beyond individual religious predation to represent aquatic environments' capacity to operate as sacred spaces where divine authority supersedes human survival instincts and legal frameworks. The creature's existence implies that certain bodies of water function as temples, where supernatural entities conduct religious ceremonies that require human participants, whether willing or unwilling. Archaeological evidence from Aztec lakeside settlements reveals architectural and cultural practices specifically designed to acknowledge the Ahuizotl's religious authority while protecting community members from becoming involuntary sacrificial offerings. Ceremonial platforms positioned for formal offerings to water spirits, community protocols for responding to drowning incidents that emphasized religious rather than rescue priorities, and settlement patterns that maintained respectful distances from waters known to be inhabited by sacred predators, all suggest that Ahuizotl encounters were managed through theological rather than purely practical frameworks. The creature's distinctive anatomy, particularly the human hand that serves as its primary predatory tool, creates a being that combines animal cunning with human dexterity, suggesting evolutionary or supernatural development that has optimized the entity for specific types of religious work that require both predatory efficiency and manual precision. This hybrid nature positions the Ahuizotl as a bridge between human and animal consciousness, operating under divine direction. Modern anthropological research has identified phenomena that echo ancient descriptions of Ahuizotl behavior with unsettling consistency. Studies of how religious frameworks can be used to rationalize predatory behavior, the psychology of individuals who believe they're carrying out divine mandates through violence, and the ways that certain communities develop theological justifications for activities that would otherwise be considered criminal, all demonstrate that human religious psychology contains vulnerabilities that could theoretically be exploited by entities capable of presenting convincing evidence of divine authority. Perhaps most disturbing is how the Ahuizotl's role as Tlaloc's agent transforms drowning victims from tragic losses into religious necessities, whose deaths serve cosmic purposes that benefit the broader community through continued divine favor. This theological framework creates moral complexity, where the creature's predatory activities become simultaneously threatening to individuals and beneficial to society, challenging simple categorizations of good and evil, protection and threat. The creature's association with rainfall and agricultural fertility connects its predatory activities to the fundamental life support systems that sustain human civilization, suggesting that the Ahuizotl's religious function operates through direct manipulation of environmental conditions that determine community survival. This places the entity at the center of cosmic negotiations, where human lives are exchanged for divine services that support entire populations. Aztec religious practices incorporated Ahuizotl-specific rituals designed to maintain appropriate relationships with the creature, while ensuring that its sacrificial activities didn't exceed the levels necessary for continued divine favor. These ceremonies weren't attempts to eliminate or control the water spirit, but rather complex theological negotiations that acknowledged its religious legitimacy, while establishing quotas and targeting criteria that protected community stability. The dangerous ocean's capacity to generate Ahuizotl-like phenomena appears to be connected to environmental and social stresses that create conditions where religious explanations for natural disasters become psychologically necessary for community survival. Modern anthropologists have documented cases where communities under extreme environmental pressure develop belief systems that rationalize individual losses through religious frameworks that emphasize cosmic rather than personal significance. Naval historians and religious scholars studying patterns of drowning incidents in traditional Ahuizotl territories have identified cases where victims die in circumstances that suggest deliberate rather than accidental submersion, often in locations with religious significance, and during times when communities are experiencing environmental stresses that might trigger supernatural intervention, seeking divine assistance through sacrificial offerings. The creature's influence on Aztec water management extends far beyond immediate religious concerns to shape how communities understand the relationship between individual survival and cosmic responsibility. The Ahuizotl represents the possibility that personal safety must sometimes be subordinated to divine requirements that operate according to supernatural rather than human priorities, creating moral frameworks where community survival may require acceptance of individual sacrificial losses. Modern environmental psychology increasingly acknowledges that certain natural disasters and ecological challenges can trigger religious responses that involve reinterpretation of individual tragedies as cosmic necessities, suggesting that Ahuizotl-type belief systems may represent universal human psychological adaptations to environmental stresses that exceed community control capabilities. The creature's deceptive use of human distress calls provides a mythological framework for understanding how religious predators might exploit community solidarity and mutual aid systems to identify and target victims, whose disappearance can be rationalized through theological rather than criminal explanations. This suggests that dangerous ocean entities may possess sophisticated understanding of human social psychology and religious vulnerability. Traditional Awazotl stories often emphasize the creature's role in maintaining cosmic balance, rather than simply causing harm, providing mythological frameworks for understanding how supernatural predation might serve positive cosmic functions that transcend individual human concerns. These theological interpretations suggest that some forms of dangerous ocean predation operate according to divine, rather than biological imperatives. What emerges from studying the Awazotl across centuries of Mesoamerican religious tradition is an understanding of the dangerous ocean as a realm where divine authority and natural predation converge to create supernatural entities that operate according to cosmic, rather than biological principles. The creature represents not just individual religious threat, but theological warning, a reminder that some mythical sea creatures embody forms of divine justice that require human sacrifice to maintain the environmental conditions supporting civilization itself. The next time you hear distress calls echoing across sacred waters, particularly in areas where religious traditions intersect with environmental management challenges, remember that the dangerous ocean has always harbored agents whose hunting activities serve cosmic purposes that transcend individual human survival. Creatures whose predatory efficiency reflects divine requirements that may demand individual sacrifices to ensure continued divine favor for entire communities, transforming every drowning into a potential act of worship that maintains the supernatural agreements, keeping the rains falling and the crops growing across landscapes where human survival depends upon divine benevolence purchased. Through offerings that the ocean's sacred executioners provide, whether victims volunteer or not. Story 21. Bakekujira, the skeleton whale that curses the living. From the divine executioners of sacred waters, we now surface into the storm-tossed seas around Japan, where the dangerous ocean reveals one of its most psychologically devastating weapons: the power to transform death into an instrument of revenge that operates through supernatural mechanisms designed to punish entire communities for their treatment of marine life. This is the story of the Bakekujira, a spectral whale whose skeletal form glows with otherworldly light as it rises from the depths to deliver curses that can destroy fishing villages, spoil harvests, and demonstrate that some mythical sea creatures embody the ocean's capacity for cosmic justice on scales that dwarf human understanding of cause and consequence. The Bakekujira represents the dangerous ocean's ultimate expression of environmental revenge, creating a supernatural entity whose very existence challenges human assumptions about the relationship between marine exploitation and cosmic consequences. This ghostly Leviathan, its massive skeleton visible through translucent flesh that glows with phosphorescent light, embodies every fishing community's deepest fears about the spiritual consequences of their necessary but potentially destructive relationship with marine life. Japanese folklore describes the Bakekujira's appearances with the kind of specific detail that suggests direct observational experience, rather than purely imaginative storytelling. The creature emerges during violent storms, its colossal skeletal form clearly visible through the tempest, as it approaches coastal settlements with deliberate purpose. Witnesses describe an entity whose size dwarfs even the largest living whales, suggesting that death has somehow increased rather than diminished its physical presence and supernatural power. What makes the Bakekujira uniquely terrifying among vengeful spirits is its systematic approach to community punishment that operates through environmental rather than direct supernatural mechanisms. Rather than attacking individuals or specific vessels, the ghost whale delivers curses that affect entire regional ecosystems, causing fish populations to disappear, contaminating water sources, triggering crop failures, and generally creating environmental conditions that make traditional subsistence impossible for communities whose survival depends on marine resources. The dangerous ocean secrets surrounding the Bakekujira extend beyond individual supernatural encounters. to represent the sea's capacity to preserve and weaponize the consciousness of marine organisms whose deaths result from human activity. The creature's origin as the vengeful spirit of a hunted whale suggests that the dangerous ocean can transform marine deaths into supernatural agents, specifically designed to deliver environmental justice through mechanisms that operate on community rather than individual scales. Archaeological evidence from Japanese coastal villages reveals cultural practices and architectural features specifically designed to prevent or mitigate Bakekujira encounters through appeasement rather than avoidance. Ceremonial sites positioned for conducting elaborate whale funeral rites, community protocols for treating whale carcasses with religious respect rather than simple utilitarian processing, and seasonal festivals designed to honor whale spirits and maintain positive relationships with marine supernatural entities all suggest that fishing communities took systematic precautions against oceanic revenge. The creature's skeletal appearance serves multiple psychological and supernatural functions that enhance its effectiveness as an agent of environmental justice. The visible bone structure creates a death imagery that removes any ambiguity about the Bakekujira's nature as a supernatural rather than biological entity, while the phosphorescent glow suggests otherworldly energy sources that operate according to principles beyond normal marine biology. Modern marine biology has documented phenomena that echo ancient descriptions of Bakekujira, encounters with unsettling consistency. Whale behavior patterns that suggest complex social intelligence and emotional responses to human activity, documented cases of cetacean species exhibiting what appears to be retaliatory behavior against fishing operations, and marine ecosystem changes that seem to correlate with intensive whaling activity, all demonstrate that the dangerous ocean contains exactly the kind of environmental feedback mechanisms that could inspire legends of supernatural revenge. Perhaps most disturbing is how the Bakekujira's environmental curse delivery system parallels contemporary understanding of how marine ecosystem disruption can trigger cascading effects that devastate human communities dependent on oceanic resources. Overfishing, pollution, and climate change effects often produce exactly the kind of comprehensive environmental degradation that Japanese folklore attributes to ghost whale curses, suggesting that supernatural revenge may be an accurate metaphorical description of real ecological processes. The creature's association with storms positions it as a force that can weaponize natural weather patterns to deliver supernatural punishment, suggesting that Bakekujira encounters represent the dangerous ocean's capacity to transform routine environmental challenges into targeted attacks against specific communities, whose relationship with marine life has violated cosmic standards of appropriate interaction. Japanese religious practices incorporated Bakekujira-specific rituals designed to prevent whale spirits from developing sufficient supernatural grievances to manifest as cursing entities. These ceremonies emphasized respectful treatment of marine life, proper spiritual protocols for necessary killing of whales and other large marine organisms, and community-wide acknowledgement of humanity's dependence on oceanic generosity rather than oceanic exploitation. The dangerous ocean's capacity to generate Bakekujira-like phenomena appears to be increasing in modern times, as industrial whaling, oceanic pollution, and climate change create environmental conditions that could theoretically trigger exactly the kind of marine ecosystem responses that traditional folklore interprets as supernatural revenge. Mass whale deaths, altered migration patterns, and ecosystem collapses all represent environmental changes that could easily be interpreted as evidence of supernatural retaliation. Naval historians and marine biologists studying patterns of unexplained fishing industry disasters have identified correlations between intensive whaling operations and subsequent environmental problems that suggest either supernatural intervention or ecological feedback mechanisms operating through principles that haven't been fully characterized by conventional marine science. These correlations often involve multiple simultaneous system failures that create comprehensive rather than isolated problems for affected communities. The creature's influence on Japanese whaling culture extends far beyond immediate supernatural concerns to shape how maritime communities understand their moral and spiritual relationship with the marine organisms whose deaths support human survival. The Bakekujira represents the possibility that every whale death creates spiritual debts that must be acknowledged and properly managed, to prevent the accumulation of supernatural grievances that could manifest as community-threatening curses. Modern environmental monitoring systems increasingly detect marine phenomena that parallel traditional descriptions of Bakekujira activity, including unusual whale behavior patterns that suggest intelligence and purpose beyond normal biological imperatives, oceanic conditions that seem to target specific human activities for disruption, and ecosystem changes that appear to operate through coordinated rather than random mechanisms. The creature's skeletal nature provides a mythological framework for understanding how marine death can be transformed into supernatural life that operates according to principles of environmental justice rather than biological survival. This transformation suggests that the dangerous ocean contains mechanisms for preserving and directing consciousness after death in ways that serve cosmic rather than individual purposes. Traditional Bakekujira stories often emphasize the preventable nature of the creature's curses, suggesting that appropriate spiritual and environmental protocols can maintain positive relationships with whale spirits and prevent the accumulation of supernatural grievances that lead to community-threatening manifestations. These preventive frameworks acknowledge that supernatural revenge represents system failure rather than inevitable natural process. What emerges from studying the Bakekujira across centuries of Japanese maritime culture is an understanding of the dangerous ocean as a realm where environmental exploitation and cosmic justice converge to create supernatural mechanisms that ensure appropriate consequences for communities whose relationship with marine life violates principles of sustainable spiritual ecology. The creature represents not just individual supernatural threat, but environmental warning, a reminder that some mythical sea creatures embody forms of cosmic justice that operate through ecosystem-level mechanisms designed to enforce appropriate relationships between human communities and the marine life whose cooperation is necessary for long-term survival. The next time you witness unusual whale behavior or experience unexplained environmental problems in coastal areas with histories of intensive marine exploitation, remember that the dangerous ocean has always possessed the capacity to transform marine deaths into supernatural agents of environmental justice. Skeletal leviathans, whose phosphorescent presence announces that some debts to the sea must be paid through community-wide consequences that demonstrate how thoroughly oceanic consciousness can preserve grievances across generations, delivering curses that ensure appropriate reverence for marine life through mechanisms that transform individual whale deaths into collective supernatural responsibility. Story 22. Lusca, the blue hole guardian that drags ships to hell. From the vengeful spirits of exploited whales, we conclude our journey through the dangerous ocean's most terrifying inhabitants, with a creature that embodies the sea's ultimate secret. That beneath the seemingly infinite blue waters lie gateways to realms so alien and hostile that they challenge human understanding of what constitutes reality itself. This is the story of the Lusca, a massive hybrid of shark and octopus that guards the blue holes of the Caribbean, underwater caverns so deep and mysterious that they serve as portals between our world and dimensions where the normal laws of physics, biology, and survival become meaningless. The Lusca represents the dangerous ocean's mastery of dimensional predation, creating a creature whose hunting territory exists partially outside normal spacetime and whose victims don't simply die. They're transported to underwater realms that operate according to principles so alien that survival becomes a concept without meaning. This colossal entity, measuring up to 75 feet in length, combines the relentless hunting instincts of apex sharks with the intelligence and grasping capability of giant cephalopods, creating a predator perfectly adapted to operating between dimensions. Caribbean folklore describes the Lusca's hunting methods with the kind of specific detail that suggests encounters with forces that transcend normal marine biology. The creature emerges from blue holes, underwater sinkholes that plunge thousands of feet into limestone bedrock, during periods when tidal and atmospheric conditions create optimal dimensional interface opportunities. These vertical caverns, some of which connect to underwater cave systems that extend for miles beneath the seafloor, serve as both the Lusca's lair and the gateways through which it transports victims to realms beyond human comprehension. What makes the Lusca uniquely terrifying among mythical sea creatures is its role as a dimensional border guard, whose existence proves that some areas of the dangerous ocean serve as intersection points between reality and other worlds that operate according to hostile, rather than merely alien principles. The creature doesn't simply kill intruders, it transports them through blue hole portals to underwater dimensions, where human consciousness becomes trapped in environments specifically designed to induce madness through exposure to forms of existence that violate every assumption about life, death, and physical reality. The dangerous ocean secrets surrounding the Lusca extend beyond individual interdimensional predation to represent the sea's capacity to harbor gateways that connect Earth's oceans to cosmic systems, where different forms of consciousness and physical law operate according to principles that make human survival impossible, not through violence, but through incompatibility with the basic requirements of terrestrial existence. Archaeological evidence from Caribbean island cultures reveals defensive and navigational practices specifically designed to identify and avoid blue hole systems that might harbor Lusca-type entities. Traditional sailing routes that maintain careful distances from known underwater cavern systems, cultural taboos against diving in areas with unusual water clarity or depth characteristics, and religious practices that acknowledge certain underwater locations as sacred or forbidden rather than simply dangerous, all suggest that Caribbean cultures considered blue holes to be functionally different from normal marine environments. The creature's hybrid anatomy, combining cephalopod intelligence and manipulative capability with shark predatory efficiency, creates a being optimized for hunting in environments where normal predator-prey relationships become meaningless due to dimensional instability. The Lusca's tentacles can reach through spatial interfaces that don't exist for normal marine organisms, while its shark characteristics provide the speed and aggression necessary to capture victims before they can escape through dimensional shifts that might otherwise provide refuge. Modern marine geology has discovered that blue holes do indeed represent unique underwater environments that operate according to physical and chemical principles significantly different from normal oceanic conditions. These underwater caverns often contain layers of water with different salinity, temperature, and chemical composition that create distinct environmental zones capable of supporting organisms that couldn't survive in normal marine environments. Perhaps most disturbing is how contemporary deep-sea exploration of blue hole systems has revealed underwater cave networks that extend far beyond what geological surveys suggest should be possible, sometimes connecting underwater systems separated by hundreds of miles of solid rock in configurations that challenge basic understanding of Caribbean geological formation. These discoveries suggest that blue holes may indeed represent gateway systems that operate according to spatial principles beyond normal three-dimensional physics. The creature's specific association with the Bahamas blue holes connects it to some of the most geologically mysterious underwater formations on Earth. Vertical caverns that plunge thousands of feet through limestone bedrock to reach depths that extend below sea level far enough to connect with underground water systems that span entire island chains. These formations create exactly the kind of dimensional interface opportunities that could theoretically support creatures operating between normal reality and other worlds. Caribbean maritime traditions incorporated Lusca-specific navigation protocols that emphasize detection and avoidance of blue hole systems, rather than attempts to explore or exploit these underwater resources. Traditional fishing and diving practices maintained careful distances from areas where unusual water conditions, strange marine life behaviors, or unexplained equipment malfunctions suggested the presence of dimensional instabilities that could attract Lusca attention. The dangerous ocean's capacity to generate Lusca-like phenomena may be increasing in modern times, as deep-sea exploration and underwater tourism bring human activity into direct contact with blue hole systems that have remained largely isolated from surface interference for geological time periods. Scuba diving operations, underwater research expeditions, and marine archaeology projects all represent human activities that could theoretically trigger encounters with entities that have evolved to guard dimensional gateways against interdimensional contamination. Naval historians and marine biologists studying patterns of unexplained disappearances in Caribbean blue hole systems have identified cases where experienced divers and marine researchers vanish in underwater caverns under circumstances that suggest encounters with large, intelligent predators whose capabilities exceed anything documented in conventional marine biology. These incidents often involve equipment that continues to function normally, despite the complete disappearance of the operators, suggesting transportation rather than destruction. The creature's influence on Caribbean maritime culture extends far beyond immediate predatory threats to shape how island communities understand the relationship between surface ocean activities and the underlying dimensional structures that determine regional environmental stability. The Lusca represents the possibility that the dangerous ocean operates as a multidimensional system where normal terrestrial reality exists as only one layer of a complex cosmic structure that includes realms specifically hostile to human consciousness. Modern underwater exploration technology has documented phenomena in Caribbean blue hole systems that parallel traditional Lusca descriptions, including sonar contacts that suggest massive organisms moving through underwater caverns, equipment malfunctions that occur specifically in proximity to certain depth levels, and water chemistry changes that seem to respond to human presence through mechanisms that don't match conventional understanding of marine ecosystem dynamics. The creature's tentacled grasping capability provides a mythological framework for understanding how dimensional predators might physically transport victims between reality layers that exist simultaneously in the same geographical space, but operate according to different physical laws. This suggests that blue hole systems may function as vertical interfaces where multiple dimensions overlap in ways that create hunting opportunities for entities adapted to interdimensional operation. Traditional Lusca stories often emphasize the creature's role as a guardian rather than simply a predator, suggesting that its attacks on human intruders serve protective functions that maintain dimensional boundaries necessary for cosmic stability. These guardian interpretations acknowledge that some forms of dangerous ocean predation operate according to cosmic, rather than biological imperatives, that prioritize dimensional security over individual human survival. What emerges from studying the Lusca across generations of Caribbean maritime tradition is an understanding of the dangerous ocean as a realm where normal reality intersects with cosmic systems that operate according to principles so alien that human consciousness cannot survive exposure without fundamental transformation. The creature represents not just individual interdimensional threat, but cosmic warning, a reminder that some mythical sea creatures embody forms of guardian consciousness that protect dimensional boundaries through mechanisms designed to ensure that certain gateways remain closed to forms of life that lack appropriate interdimensional adaptation. As we conclude our journey through the dangerous ocean's most terrifying mythical inhabitants, the Lusca serves as the perfect capstone to our exploration, a creature that embodies every theme we've encountered, magnified to cosmic proportions. From the deceptive innocence of childlike predators to the divine authority of oceanic gods, from the patient intelligence of living islands to the vengeful justice of environmental spirits, the Lusca represents the ultimate synthesis of oceanic terror, a guardian of gateways between worlds, whose very existence proves that the dangerous ocean harbors secrets so profound that they transcend the boundaries of reality itself. The next time you peer into the crystalline blue depths of a Caribbean blue hole, remember that you may be gazing into dimensional interfaces where creatures larger than ships and stranger than nightmares maintain eternal vigil over cosmic boundaries that separate our reality from realms where human consciousness becomes impossible, not through death, but through exposure to forms of existence so alien that they transform the very concept of being human into a temporary illusion that dissolves upon contact with the true nature of the dangerous ocean's deepest, darkest, and most fundamental secrets. From the cosmic chaos of Tiiamat to the dimensional guardians of Caribbean blue holes, we've journeyed through waters where mythology and reality converge in ways that challenge everything we think we know about the dangerous ocean. These 22 mythical sea creatures represent more than ancient superstitions. They're cultural memories of humanity's encounters with forces that operate beyond our comprehension. Each creature we've explored reveals a different aspect of the ocean's power to terrify, mystify, and humble human ambition. Whether through the patient deception of living islands, the psychological warfare of singing predators, or the cosmic justice of vengeful spirits, these beings remind us that the dangerous ocean harbors secrets that transcend simple biology to become something far more profound and unsettling. The most chilling truth we've discovered isn't that these creatures might exist, it's that the ocean environments that inspired them remain as mysterious and potentially threatening today as they were thousands of years ago. In our satellite-mapped, GPS-tracked world, 95% of the ocean depths remain unexplored, leaving vast underwater realms where reality and mythology could still intersect in ways that would make our ancestors' nightmares seem like pleasant dreams. As you've journeyed with me through these dark waters tonight, you've glimpsed the dangerous ocean's capacity to preserve ancient fears in forms that continue to challenge modern understanding. From divine serpents that embrace the world to phantom monks that offer impossible choices, these mythical sea creatures represent humanity's deepest acknowledgement that some mysteries are too vast, too alien, and too fundamental to ever be fully solved. Thank you for diving into these oceanic depths with me. If these tales have awakened your curiosity about the unknown, hit that subscribe button. Your support helps us continue exploring the boundaries where science meets mystery and where human understanding encounters forces that operate according to principles beyond our comprehension. Until our next expedition into the unexplained, remember that the dangerous ocean still holds secrets that would make these ancient legends seem like gentle lullabies. The depths are waiting, and some mysteries are best left undisturbed. Sweet dreams, and may your encounters with the unknown remain safely on this side of the screen.